1. Are members aware of any apologies? No. Okay. Agenda item 2 then is Chairperson's business. 2.1 is a record of the informal meeting with the Future Schools project on the 5th of October. Can I refer members to a record of the informal briefing on the Future Schools project? And the committee has planned to have a formal briefing on the work of the project at its meeting on the 17th of November. Members content to note, agreed? Thank you. Okay. Agenda item 3 then is draft minutes. Can I refer members to draft minutes of the committee meetings on the 6th of October and 7th of October at page 8 and page 15 of your reading packs, and seek your agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Agreed? Agreed. If members could give me an audible agreed, it helps with records. Thanks. Members content to agree to the minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is matters arising. There are no matters arising. And agenda item 5 is correspondence. Can I refer members to page 19, where we have 6 items of correspondence and a summary note at page 20. Can I ask the clerk to speak to the correspondence, please? Thank you.
Yes, Chair. Members, item 5.2 on page 22 is a response from the Minister providing an update on clarification on a range of issues in relation to school restart. Do members have any views on that one?
No, okay, we're content to note that and come back to it if necessary at another meeting then, Clark. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Chair. Then item 5.4 on page 33 is a response from the department providing an update on post-primary transfer and the difficulties that were experienced at the start of term in placing children in appropriate post-primary places. So are members content with that update?
Not really.
Okay.
There's no attempt to limit the cost of school uniforms, so it has no impact. It means nothing.
I think that's 5.3, is it? On page 30, Justin, about the uniform policy. So
Yeah.
you'll see.
Sorry, let's skip ahead.
No, don't worry. No, don't worry. There is. We're hoping to have a briefing on uniform. It's in the forward work programme, I think, for November. So yeah, they are reviewing issues relating to uniform and also home to school transport. But do you want to write back then in the meantime, Justin, about that?
I think seek clarification as to what this actually means in terms of limiting the cost of school uniforms for families.
Okay.
Which is what the issue is about. All fundamentally is about affordability for all.
Thank you.
Yeah, Clark, I note that the letter advises that preparatory work has begun to enable the department to take forward a review of free school meals and uniform grant eligibility criteria, but as Justin says, that seems a very limited scope. However, perhaps it would be worth us taking a short briefing from the department regards what the terms of reference of that review will be. I also note that it advises that the options on the way forward would be considered by April 2022. It feels like an awfully long time away on something like this. So maybe would members be content that we invite the department to brief us on the review in order on the terms of reference on the view to ensure that the scope is wide enough? Justin, does that make sense?
Agreed, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Clark.
Okay, we also have research on deprivation measures other than free school meals, which we could maybe provide to the department alongside that. Okay, thank you, members. So item 5.4, sorry, I mentioned item 5.4. Item 5.5 on page 37 is correspondence from the department providing a written update on the October monitoring round. Remember, I provisionally, I've spoken to the department about dates to hear about the monitoring round, and if members are agreed, we'll have another briefing on that as soon as possible. The date is actually in the provisional date is in the forward work programme. Is that agreed?
Okay, yeah, Clark, sorry, just that before Justin rightly brought us in on the school uniform issue, I think you had referenced item 5.4, our correspondence with the department in relation to contingency plans for post-primary transfer.
Yes.
I just bring it to members' attentions, I suppose, to say that in effect it's the same response that we've consistently received from the Department of Education, which is that we should note that post-primary transfers are organised and operated by private providers and are wholly unregulated by the department, which has no role in their operation or timing. Should the test be cancelled due to public health, it will be a matter for individual boards of governors in those schools that use the scores from the tests in their admissions criteria to decide what alternative criteria they may wish to use where test scores are not available. So it just by not to initiate debate, but for point of information, just to make sure members are aware of what the Department of Education is saying in relation to any concerns anyone would have about any contingency for any potential disruption to testing for admissions to year 8. It's a consistent non-intervention position. Members wish to comment on that or consent to note?
You can't see my hand up then. If I put the hand up function, can you see it now?
Let me just check. Yes, okay. That's us now, Robbie. Go ahead then.
No, because my camera's not working, so it'll save you looking at my dick all day. So
no problem.
Another part, thanks for bringing this up, because another part of the letter, in the second page of it, it says the department has commenced on a lessons learned exercise with the EA. But they're not actually, because there's two things. You've already pointed out the elephant in the room is that basically they're just transferring the responsibility again onto boards of governors and schools. So therefore, by de facto, they're saying that there will be no change if the tests don't happen. And last year, so I'm just wondering what the point in the lessons learned is. They're already tailoring it to for no benefit to the children. And just to make the other committee members aware, with regard to the appeals and the special circumstance or exceptional circumstances route, I asked on one of the boards that I sat on, in terms of their rules of engagement for it. They pertain to if the transfer test had went ahead. So they were using a system or a rigid system that the appeals process, the exceptional circumstances, they're confined to what would be done if the exam had been set. So there was nothing to take into account that the exams didn't happen. So I think it's something we need to be very wary of. I don't know if that's going to be the case this year with regard to the transfers being test being set or not. It looks like they may go ahead, but I don't think that this is a satisfactory response. I think they need to be looking at the guidance that they give to schools in regard to that.
Yeah, Robbie, thanks for that. I note further that the correspondence states that revised, well, it refers to contingencies in terms of operational matters, in terms of online applications, not contingencies for alternative admission, but it also references revised guidance to schools on the transfer process will issue in the coming weeks and will include guidance on the admissions criteria schools should and should not use. Clark, would be useful if the department can give us as early sight of that revised guidance as possible. Indeed, maybe they might have found it useful to consult with us on that revised guidance, but I presume that won't be the case. But at the very least, if they could give us early notice, early sight of that guidance. Robbie, have you any other actions you'd like to take? I consistently note that the committee took as robust action as I think we could have in terms of previous engagement on this issue and collective calling for contingency plans by an assembly motion. But any other action?
Not at this stage, Chair. Just I would just encourage the members to perhaps have a look at the departmental guidance for schools, which I don't think works. I don't think it's any. I think it might be more discriminatory in many ways than what was there before, and that's not even getting into the. It's not about the rights and wrongs of transportation. I'm not sure. Just what happened last year didn't fix the thing that we want to address, in the longer term. So.
Yeah, no, I think we would agree on that. The lack of a contingency made the criteria even more distressing for many pupils and families across Northern Ireland. Thanks for that, members. Clark, okay to proceed with correspondence, thanks.
Sure, thank you. So October monitoring, I've just checked back with the forward work plan, and the 3rd of November meeting will have an oral briefing on October monitoring and school uniform issues, and also it will address a ministerial direction on the spending of for Stroul, the shared education campus. Members, we can share the written update on the October monitoring round with the Committee for Finance if you're content.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 5.8 then on page 4 of table papers of correspondence from Community Relations in Schools about its survey of nursery schools and concerns about the impact of the pandemic on those schools. Members, did you have a chance to look at that? It only came in yesterday, now it's in your table pack.
Clark, it might be worth resubmitting that to the correspondence in next week's pack to make sure that we have given that full consideration. Would that be okay?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I suppose it might be interesting to hear from the schools. But yeah, we can put it back in next week's pack. It's particularly schools in North and West Belfast. Okay. Yeah, and I've had apologies from the deputy chair for today. So I'll put it in next week's pack.
I think that might be sensible. No problem. Thanks.
Sure. Okay. So that's all the correspondence, members. If you're content, to dispose of the rest as per the summary note at page 20. Thank you.
Agreed, members?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thanks,
okay,
Robin.
members. Agenda item 6 is forward work programme. Can I refer members to draft forward work programme at page 9 of the table of papers? Members will see read across from the list of stakeholders who emailed submissions to the committee for the committee stage of the Integrated Education Bill and the forward work programme. Clark, do you want to speak to the forward work programme in any detail?
Sure, I'll just run through what we've booked in kind of recently. So in terms of integrated education bill stage stakeholders, next week's so today you have a brief about what has been received in the call for evidence, 3 categories of response. We have scheduled in then the Integrated Education Alumni, Control Sector Support Council, Children's Commissioner, Transfers Representatives Council. Who else have we got? I think that's all. That's finally, but we're also talking to CCMS and other stakeholders. So really, members, if you get it when you get a chance to look at that integrated education item, just flag up to me which stakeholders you think maybe need to come to give oral evidence that aren't already represented on the forward work programme, and we will prioritise contacting them. Other than that, today is obviously our dyslexia briefing. Next week is the concurrent meeting with the Committee of the Economy. That is a hybrid meeting. We have secured the Senate chamber, so those of you who want to go in to Parliament buildings for that meeting, will be able to go to the Senate chamber. It will be from 10 until 11:30, and the pack that will be sent out from the Committee of the Economy, it'll have a range of cross-cutting issues in it, but the main event is a joint briefing from the two departments on the 14 to 19 strategy. So you'll be able to feed in questions from your session with Pivotal, questions from your session on the Fair Start report and action plan last week, and even some of the material from next week's informal meeting with Lincoln Generations Northern Ireland. Those are all kind of related to that 14 to 19 strategy. I haven't scheduled a dedicated education committee meeting on the 20th as well. We have one on the 21st with two integrated education stakeholders. Then the 27th of October is assembly recess, and there's no meeting. And you'll see what we've got planned then for the weeks following up to that. There's another gap in the programme on the 1st of December that just seems to have happened quite naturally after the final date for the end of the committee stage. And it may be that the 1st of December is our opportunity to get a visit. Members have expressed quite a bit of interest in visits over the last couple of weeks. So please email me, where it is that you particularly want to go. The department advises that there's no guidance applicable to all schools on visits to schools just now. So it's a question of approaching an individual school and speaking to the principal and board of governors to set up, a safe visit. Distancing and masks are still in place at the moment, although that may change on Thursday. Okay, members, that's your forward work programme.
Okay, thanks. Clark, in terms of the information in regards to the response to the call for evidence on the integrated education bill and considering what other stakeholders you would invite, it might be useful for me just to recap on the extent of the response received to the call for evidence. So obviously the call for evidence for the bill was issued to stakeholders on the 17th of July. The call for evidence ran publicly on the publicly accessible citizen space platform until the 10th of October. Committee motion to extend the committee stage of the bill to the 24th of November was agreed by the Assembly on the 4th of October. The call for evidence received a total of 1,116 responses. 523 came through Citizen Space. Clark, is it worth saying a bit about what Citizen Space is? That's an Assembly platform that we use on call for evidence?
Yeah, it's a survey platform. Initially, we were using the civil service one, and then just as the Education Committee was about to go out for its call for evidence for this bill, the Assembly decided to procure its own account. So it's like SurveyMonkey, but it has additional intuitive capacity. So it does a bit more analysis, for instance, than some of the other platforms.
Okay. Cool.
And it's particularly useful for this for bill stages.
Excellent. And 575 responses were from individuals under the campaign Support the Integrated Education Bill, and 18 came via email. As you say, Clark, Citizen Space is an online survey platform, and then that was 523 individuals filled that out. In terms of the 18 submissions by email, that included Transfer Representatives Council, Church of Ireland Board of Education, Controlled Sector Support Council, Counselling for Catholic Maintained Schools, Equality Commission, IEF, National Secular Society, Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, Presbyterian Church in Ireland, Workers' Party, Labour Party, Catholic Schools Trustee Service, Governing Bodies Association, NICE, Northern Ireland Humanists, Shane Greer, Trustee, Integrated Alumni Board Member, the Cooperative Party, Northern Ireland, and Sana G.
And the
So
Methodist
these,
Church in Ireland.
and the Methodist Church in Ireland. So these submissions are being uploaded to an electronic pack that will be with members as soon as possible, Clark, is that right? Yeah?
That's true, Chair, yeah.
Yeah, and as the clerk has said, a number of these organisations are already in the forward work programme. I'll not go through everyone named in the 523 responses via the citizen space, but in terms of the citizen space survey, that is available. The responses and the analysis of the responses to that are available on 9.4 of table papers, and there are some fairly interesting findings there. Do you agree with the policy objectives of the bill? 95.79% yes. Do you think the provisions of the bill will be effective in achieving policy objectives? 85%. And there's a few, obviously a good few other questions there as well. But 523 responses broken down into other issues there. As per clause 5 definition of the term promotion, do you consider the duty to promote to be a reasonable duty? 93% yes. So yeah, good data there. Wide range of respondents. Definitely something to assist the committee with its deliberations. Fair enough, Clark?
It is indeed, Chair. And so just in terms of legislative items, the committee stage takes us up to the 24th of November, as I said. Primary legislation on CPR in schools and period products, which are both private members' bills, have been introduced in the House. So do members wish to hear from the sponsors of those bills again before the second stage debate? The reason for hearing from them before second stage would be to discuss with them whether they are considering a motion for accelerated passage. So obviously that would have a significant bearing on the committee's legislative workload, whether it will do two committee stages or not.
Clark, just to check, did you say the holiday hunger and the free period product provision bills?
CPR in schools. So CPR in schools, Colin McGrath's bill, and he did present at an informal meeting to the committee already on a Tuesday, and it's a very short and straightforward bill, which is why I mentioned accelerated passage.
Yeah.
Is Pat Capney's? Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead, Clark. I think it's not coming to the Education Committee, is that right?
Well, there will be a discussion under Standing Order 64 as to which committee it goes with, essentially. So, it has some provisions in it about health, some about education, some about economy, really. So we need to have a chat between clerks and chairs about where that would go. But I mean, it's just the timing of the accelerated passage discussion. I can try to find time in the schedule for that if members wish.
Yes, Chair. Excuse me. Yes, firmly support that. They have brief discussions with us. Even if it's very short insertion for our committee time. And the accelerated passage piece is crucially important on both those bills because they can't be delayed and they're not contentious. Forge ahead on anything we can do to assist their movement through the House. Let's do so.
Yep, happy enough with that. Members content to agree that? Here, sorry, just to be clear, Clark, what we're asking to agree is that if the proposers find it helpful to give us a short briefing on those bills, that we would take those short briefings. Members content to agree that? Yep. Agreed?
Agreed,
okay. Thanks. Okay. Members content to agree the forward work programme as amended. Agreed? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, Clark, is that correspondence and forward work programme completed?
It is, Chair.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Then we move on to agenda item 7, which is our oral briefing from the Children's Law Centre on dyslexia services for school children. Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove members from the spotlight and to add our witnesses? Can I refer members to a note from the committee clerk at page 88, a briefing paper from Dyslexia Awareness NI from the informal meeting we had on the 14th of September 2021 at page 91, a record of the informal meeting with Dyslexia Awareness NI on the 14th of September at page 93, Too Little, Too Late report from Nikki and the review of SEN in mainstream schools at page 95, and a briefing paper from the Children's Law Centre on page 17 of tabled papers. Can I give a very warm welcome to Rachel Hogan, the Special Educational Needs representative from the Children's Law Centre, Mr. Liam Mackle, the Advice Manager at Children's Law Centre. And Rachel, are we expecting a parent representative as well, or are we proceeding with yourselves? Liam, you want to come in there? Yeah, go ahead.
I've just got a call from Kate there. She works as a classroom assistant, so she was intending to get on to Starleaf from her workplace, but after half an hour of trying, she can't get on in her workplace. It just phoned me there. She's driving from the school to her home. Her husband's presently setting her up on the computer at home, so she's about 3 minutes from her destination. So by the time myself and Rachel have spoke to yourselves, hopefully Kate will be on and ready to go.
No problem. That's dedication, Liam. This person wants to be heard.
Hearing, you know.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We'll be glad to facilitate that as well. As you suggest, Liam, worth us allowing Rachel and yourself to make progress and then bring Kate in as soon as possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hand over to you guys. And as I said, we're really grateful for you attending the committee. Again, in Rachel's case, we really appreciate the expertise that you guys bring to bear on so many issues affecting children and young people in Northern Ireland. We look forward to hearing from you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks for allowing us the opportunity to speak about this extremely important issue, which we've been working on for many, many years in the Children's Law Centre. First of all, I do want to acknowledge the work of Dyslexia Awareness Northern Ireland, who, as you've mentioned, have provided an evidence paper to the Education Committee. That's a community and voluntary organisation which raises awareness through parents and educators working together to raise the issues in the public eye. These are issues that have been very long standing in Northern Ireland, and despite all of our best efforts to fix the system, there's still a lot of work to be done. So I really want to acknowledge their work because they act as volunteers in their spare time and they've achieved a lot and will continue to do so, with no doubt. Just to acknowledge as well the work of the staff in the EA Literacy Service, who have produced some really good results in the cases that we have seen, which is why we're so very keen to ensure that children can access that service. And I want to just provide credit where credit's due to the literacy service provided by the EA, and also to our schools, who actually provide full support for about 98% of the children who have literacy difficulties within our system. And I think they are struggling in terms of capacity to deliver everything that's required, but they certainly seem to be trying their best to do so in difficult circumstances. Further development of services and additional resources are required for schools. And I just as well want to pay tribute to the children and young people themselves who have specific learning difficulties, including dyslexia, and to acknowledge all of their hopes and dreams and their aspirations, and to encourage them to continue to reach high and work hard. We know that they have to work that little bit harder at times in the classroom, and that they can achieve their dreams just as much as anybody else with the right support. And we're always very filled with admiration for all of the work that the children do to bring forward their own education. In our casework and advice work, really, the key issue is failure of early intervention, and children having to wait for very lengthy periods to receive help and support. Lack of evidence-based practice is another issue in terms of the supports that are put in place. Is there consistent evidence that these work, and what are the outcomes for the children? Are those measured? Looking at the Code of Practice on Special Educational Needs in Northern Ireland, paragraph 2.14 of that code, which is the statutory code, states that it is important that children's special educational needs are identified at an early stage. The earlier that action is taken, the more responsive the child is likely to be. That is echoed again in the Northern Ireland Audit Office report in relation to SEN impacts, where they again raised this point that early intervention isn't occurring in our schools. Strategies aren't necessarily evidence-based, and they therefore question the value for money for the public purse in terms of what are the inputs and what are the outputs of this system, and we would very much share that concern. I think we're looking here at a service that has been overwhelmed for many years and under-resourced. There have been efforts in recent times to provide CPD and different types of resources and approaches and different screening techniques to try and improve early intervention. However, it's just not enough. And as Nikki's report is entitled, it's too little and it's too late. And we would agree with that, the assessment in their report as well. There is a duty under Article 13 of the 1996 Education Order to identify children who may have special educational needs. And that's a duty on the Education Authority. We have some data, although there's very limited data available on the dyslexia services. The latest data we have at the minute is from 2019, and that's Department of Education data. And it's about it's a breakdown of different types of special educational needs within the SEN population. That data has, in 2019, 10,122 children listed under the category of dyslexia, which represents at that point 12.8% of the SEN population. And I note that over the years, that percentage of the population has increased by approximately 1 percentage point per year or thereabouts. So it's an increasing proportion of the population. Under the category cognition and learning at stages 1 to 2 of the Code of Practice, where maybe specific learning difficulties might not yet have been identified, there are 16,659 children in 2019. Now that in itself is actually concerning because it's not really clear how many of these children have literacy difficulties. And when we look at the information provided by Dyslexia Awareness Northern Ireland, they've told us that 1 in 10 people in the United Kingdom have dyslexia. And they estimate that that should equate to about 35,000 school children. So there's a gap there where I think we can say there's a significant unmet need, or a significant proportion of the population may as yet remain unidentified. Dyslexia Awareness Northern Ireland have also told us that they believe that around 2,000 children per year are receiving direct literacy support from the EA's Literacy Support Service. So if we've got 35,000 children approximately with these difficulties and 2,000 are receiving specialist teaching support, then everybody else is receiving school-based support. That's why it's very, very important in our new SEN framework that we ensure that the capacity of schools is fully built and that we have sufficient qualified personnel within schools to meet the needs of children with dyslexia. We might actually need qualified teachers in every school in order to be able to meet the needs of this high prevalence special educational need. One of the key issues in blocking children from receiving support in our system is bureaucracy that has sprung up over the years due to lack of budget. That has taken the form of the provisional criteria on special educational needs, which we've referred to in the briefing to the Education Committee. The criteria that have been set there by the Education Authority to identify who should receive direct teaching support are extremely rigid and narrow, to the extent that they only apply if a child has an IQ of 90 or above, and if they are in the bottom 2% of the population in terms of their attainment gap. So they've got a large gap between their cognitive ability and their attainment to the extent that they fall in the bottom 2% of the population. Now, if we've got 1 in 10 people who have dyslexia, I think we have a very definite issue in terms of provision there. That bottom 2% of the population, in the cases that we see, are essentially people who are non-functional in terms of reading and writing and spelling. And non-functional means they cannot function in the classroom. Typically from P2, P3 onwards, we're seeing these children very distressed. Their peers are learning. They're sitting there thinking they're stupid and saying, "I'm stupid, mummy. I'm stupid, daddy." When actually they're perfectly capable of reading and writing, learning, and they've been halted in doing so because of the lack of early intervention. That's not to say that no one's receiving support. We have seen cases where children have received support We've seen baseline assessments of those children and then the increase in their functionality up to the point of being a functional reader. And it's really pleasing to see that and gives those children a springboard to move forward. So 98% of children are supported at school level. We need to scope the unmet need, and we need to get data collection that identifies everybody from stage 1 to stage 5. Now, one of the issues when you ask questions around how many children are there is that, for example, the EA will say stages 1 to 3, that's school level data, or stages 1 and 2, that's school level data. We don't hold that. So there's no consistency of collection of data to enable service planning and look at the pipeline going forward as to what we're going to need. I would refer in that sense to the Children's Services Cooperation Act, which requires that children's services authorities and providers work together for the well-being of children. And I would ask all children's services providers and parents as well to provide the data, the information that's needed in order to inform policy and processes as we move forward into a hopefully improved operation within the Education Authority and an improved SEND framework. The teachers in schools and the classroom assistants and so on who support these children require regular, targeted, continuous professional development. And I know Dyslexia Awareness Northern Ireland would be calling for mandatory CPD because of the prevalence of this disorder. And there needs to be a consistent framework through from stage 1 to stage 5, a clear pathway with a timely intervention that children follow. Not children sitting on stage 1 and 2 for years and not moving forward, but children moving through the continuum of support at a reasonable speed so that they're getting the intervention in time. It's notable that on the 15th of June 2011, the Department of Education gave evidence to the Education Committee and said the following. They said, research shows that where we provide intervention at the age of 6 to 7, there is an 80% success rate for children with those difficulties. If you leave that intervention until the age of 10, there is only a 20% chance of those children becoming successful. That's a very sobering thought when we look at some of our clients who need intervention. Now, that was in 2011. In this recent past, I've dealt with a young person who was in primary 3 when they were screened and identified as requiring specialist teaching support from the EA's literacy service. After a year, nothing had occurred, so the parent contacted the Children's Law Centre and I corresponded then with the Education Authority. And I was told that advice and strategies had been provided to school. Now, what we have found is that the EA, in an effort to try and spread this provision, has diluted it so that many children will receive advice and strategies to school. And schools will carry out long lists of these interventions and reach the end of the line effectively over a period of time. But the children are blocked from receiving actual specialist literacy support. And some children can't move forward without that. And those children need to get that sooner. So this child that I was representing, after a year and a half of waiting, eventually did then start to receive direct literacy support. And she went on to require a statement of special educational needs. Liam is going to look at the statutory stages. That's stages 4 and 5, the statementing of the code of practice. Just to mention as well, I think it's important to point out there are different groups within schools. A one-size-fits-all approach doesn't necessarily work and a whole range of interventions is required. We have had information after consulting CNG that Irish medium children are particularly disadvantaged, and that's because of the way that they learn in Irish and when they learn English. And there tends to be, we're told, a wait-and-see approach, wait till the children are learning English, which could be 2 years after their peers of the same in the same group. The wait-and-see approach we know doesn't work from what the department has told us about success rates. And the other issue they've raised is that the screening tools are standardised in English and therefore are not suitable for Irish medium educated children. And they point out that the government provides for 2 different languages to be official languages within Northern Ireland schools, and yet there's only standardised testing and interventions which are English based. So I think that needs to be taken into account. You'll also hear representations at times from, say, the deaf and disabled communities, visually impaired communities, that the testing doesn't suit them. So I think the testing maybe needs to be looked at as well to see how it can actually identify all of the different needs as early as possible. We had been dealing with this issue over and over again repeatedly for years, and we took a High Court action called JR 62 which was successful in the High Court. And it was for a 9-year-old child who was going to be on an interminable waiting list until about P6, if he was lucky to get support. We were successful in the High Court. Mr. Justice Tracy agreed that there was a legal issue. However, the Education Authority did appeal it, and the Court of Appeal decided that because literacy support was a non-statutory or Stage 3 support service, there wasn't a statutory duty to provide it, and resources could be taken into account. But they were highly critical of, I think, of the Department of Education, because in that case, the Education Authority, or the board as it then was, had sought additional funding to try and meet the needs of all the children and had been refused. And that they had been left with no choice but to dilute the service, close their reading centres, move to advice and strategies as opposed to direct support, and then put a lengthy waiting list in place. So statement to children, P7, P6, P5, P4. If you were in P4, P5, P6, you were probably not going to get onto that list. And the aim there was to help children to learn to read and write before the end of P7, and that's just too late. I think it's worth maybe finishing by referring to what the court had actually said there, and then I'll pass on to Liam. The Court of Appeal said in 2013, during the course of the hearing of this appeal, we were struck by the absence of any contribution by the department. This is the third judicial review to have been instituted in this particular area, and each of these cases has highlighted delays and difficulties encountered by boards in seeking to make provision for special educational needs, consistent with the code and strategy of the department, when working within the restricted financial resources made available by the department. It pointed out that additional funding had been refused, and finished by saying that education is fundamental to the fulfilment of personal, social and career potential, and in any just and fair society, every reasonable and practical effort should be made to ensure that those with special educational needs are not disadvantaged thereby. In the absence of any informative contribution, this court could not presume to express a view as to how a department of the executive should allocate funds for social or educational purposes, but it must be a matter of some concern that there appears to be a lack of communication and rational debate between the department and the board, and that is unlikely to inure to the benefit of either the board or the public. And I just will finish as well by saying that the new SEND framework, it's fundamental that capacity is built in order to make that work. And the EA plan of arrangements that will hopefully be released in the near future is an opportunity for the EA to set out the services that it's going to provide to children. And we want to see that that's based on open consultation and discussion on what should be in that plan and clear criteria so we can all see what children are entitled to receive. And finally, we'd like to call for an independent review and evaluation of Education Authority non-statutory or Stage 1 to 3 interventions, including the Literacy Support Service. It had been reviewed by the Education Authority when it came into being, but it's still not fit for purpose. It's not evidence-based and it's not producing what every child needs. So we think that it needs to be independently scrutinised, evaluated, and that we can then make evidence-based decisions going forward for the benefit of our children who have specific learning difficulties, dyslexia, and other special educational needs as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Do Liam or Kate want to say anything at this stage before we move to questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll go up next and then I'll hand over to Kate. I mean, the issue that I wanted to sort of highlight is, as Rachel has said, the refusal of the Education Authority to make provision for direct teaching for literacy support, which we see as a successful service. It's a service that children need, but the refusal to make that service available to children who have statements. So, I mean, I'm representing children in tribunals for about 20 years, and it used to be the case that I would go along to tribunals for pupils with dyslexia, arguing that they should have a statement of special educational needs. And the educational library boards at that stage would argue that there was no need for a child with a dyslexia to have a statement of special educational needs because a classroom assistant would do nothing to address their dyslexia. And the only thing that would address their dyslexia and the gap in attainments was direct literacy teaching. We've now moved from that position to the Education Authority going along to tribunals to argue that pupils with statements and classroom assistants don't need literacy support. It's absolutely quite bizarre. I mean, we're familiar with the NICI report and the internal audit report and the audit report, all pointing towards a service which is broken. And the danger is when you have a service that's tailored to provide services for vulnerable children, if that service is broken, then the services those children are meant to be provided with isn't there, and the danger is that those children are damaged by the fact that that service is broken. In 2011, our advice service was dealing with about 327 SEN cases, SEN issues each year, and that was about 15% of our total caseload. In 2019-20, statistics we gave to the committee in March 2020, that had risen to over 1,500, and about 50% of our issue caseload is around special educational needs. So over the course of those 8 years, we've seen a perfect storm. We've seen increasing numbers of children with special educational needs. We've seen austerity rip the guts out of the public service, and we've also seen a whole process around change and transformation within as the 5 boards move to the Education Authority. So you have a perfect sort of storm there. When I used to go to those tribunals 10 and 15 years ago, there was about less than 100 tribunals a year. There's now over 400. And I mean, what we're seeing is, and you'll be aware, I'm sure, that 93% of those appeals that are made by parents are successful. So it shouldn't be the case, and Kate will talk about this when she outlines her experience. It shouldn't be the case that only those pupils with dyslexia whose parents have the wherewithal to take appeals, who get representation from the Children's Law Centre, are the only pupils with dyslexia who get provision of direct literacy teaching on their statements. It shouldn't be that case. It shouldn't be the case that the Education Library Board, the Education Authority have boxed themselves into a situation where they view direct literacy teaching, which is, if you look at the definition of special education provision in Article 3 of the order, is special education provision. Article 16 requires the Education Authority to specify in a statement the special educational provision required by a child, but there is an absolute refusal by the Education Authority, unless they're compelled to specify direct literacy teaching as special education provision in a statement. And I mean, I hope that the committee will query that with the Education Authority when they speak to them later on, because to my mind, that is one of the most pressing issues within the system at this time. Obviously, the service needs properly resourced in order to meet the needs of children, but it should be the needs of the children that's driving that service, not the resources that are or aren't available for that service. So, I think, Kate has a story to tell which encompasses both what myself and Rachel have been saying in terms of the difficulties. Kate, had a fight around obtaining any service through the school-based stages. Then she had a 2-year fight to get to the stage where her son got the provision that he needed. He needed it way before she ever contacted the Children's Law Centre, but it took all that time for her to achieve and get the provision. And as Rachel has said, the longer you leave that provision, the more difficult it is for that child to close that gap and to get up to a level that they should be with their peers, and which their ability level, says they should be at. I mean, I have another pupil who was wrongly labelled as moderate learning difficulties when he was 5 because he's autistic. It was very difficult to get a cognitive profile for him. He was labelled as MLD, and MLD pupils do not get literacy support. As Rachel has identified, when the provisional criteria brought out, you had to have an IQ of 90 in order to access direct literacy support. He's now in 2nd year in post-primary school. He has never had direct literacy support. His attainments in literacy when he was in P4 were 66. He's in 2nd year in post-primary. His attainments in literacy are still 66, and the Education Authority still refuses to make direct literacy support for that child. There's a complaint with the Ombudsman's Office, and we hope that will also shed further light on it. But in terms of the story and the journey, I'd hand over to Kate now and let her describe her experience.
Thanks, Liam. Thanks, Kate. Just to give you a very warm welcome to the Education Committee today, Kate. We're very glad that you were able to join us, and thanks for the effort that you've put in to make sure that you were able to connect via Starleaf today. Thank you.
No, that's grand. Do you know what, Chris? I'm really, really delighted to be here, and I'm really grateful to Liam and the Children's Law Centre because it helps me tell the story of Aidan. Because I'm extremely passionate about advocating for Aidan's rights, but not only for Aidan, but also all the other dyslexic children's rights throughout Northern Ireland. So I don't want, there's so much I could tell you, but I'm really long-winded, so I'm trying to summarise it as best I can. And unfortunately, the process is really complex. Sorry.
And that so I have the unenviable task of cutting people short in this education committee, unfortunately, but just to give you an idea, well, no, I don't want to cut you short, that's definitely not, but just to give you an idea of the context, we're about 20 minutes in, and we'll have probably another hour, but there are 8 members who will be really, really keen and eager to interact with all 3 of you as well. So just to give you an idea of the context, we normally allocate 10 minutes for opening statements. We're at 20 minutes now, and I mean this as a significant, but we are really eager to give you as much time as we can to tell your story, but just to give you that context, okay? Thanks.
I spent ages last night doing it, so I've whittled down to 5 pages. So, but I will try and summarise that the best I can, okay? And Liam, see at any time if I've made a mistake or whatever, can you just come in, because there's so much, and I'm trying my best to, I just feel that, you know, I really want everyone to know exactly how stressful and I would use the word traumatic it has been for my son. Sorry, I'm very emotional about this. Sorry.
You're okay, Kate. By all means, take your time. What's your son's name?
My son is called Aidan, and I have a little picture of him for you. And I don't know what I've done with that. Oh no, here.
You're okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see that, but that is Aidan on Valentine's Day with a rose in between his teeth for me for Valentine's Day. So I think I wanted to start off just by saying Aidan was a happy, funny, outgoing child, and then he went to school and he found school really, really difficult. Now, in P1, things were not too bad, things were grand, that was grand, but whenever he had homework to do, it was an almighty crisis. He just really, really struggled to do that. But that was grand. We just thought, Aidan's a wee boy, he can't be bothered doing his homework, that's dead on. So we didn't put too much emphasis on it. But then in P2, we noticed that Aidan had great difficulty with phonetics. He was unable to retain, recognise and blend the sounds into words. I was really concerned about this, and I'd say end of September, October, I went to the teacher and also the principal to say that I was concerned, and I actually felt that Aidan needed some more support because Aidan was a really, really bright child, and it made no sense to us whatsoever that a bright child couldn't read, write or spell in P2 and unable to remember any of the sounds. So I would spend time at home going through the sounds of them, and then the next day he couldn't remember them, couldn't remember any of the sounds. So I felt that we really needed help with this because myself and my husband, we aren't teachers, so we felt that it would be the school or the job of the school to actually give us that support. When I went to the principal to speak to him about it, he said that unfortunately they didn't have the money to provide extra support for Aidan, so there was really nothing that they could do. He had advised that possibly at this point that maybe we could get some external support with a tutor, and that might be able to help Aidan at that point. When I spoke to his actual teacher, his teacher thought Aidan was fine and there was nothing really to worry about. But however, sadly at the end of P2, she had now decided at this point that there actually was a concern, because at the end of P2, she realised that Aidan had only learned 2 sounds throughout the whole year. So obviously we were really shocked to hear that and really concerned about Aidan's progression. Then quickly moving into P3, at this point, because Aidan was not able to meet any of his targets at all, the teacher, who was really fab with Aidan in terms of connecting with Aidan and supporting Aidan, he developed 3 individual IEPs over the course of the year with specific targets. And then, unfortunately, at the end of the year, I had a meeting with his teacher, and he was gravely concerned about Aidan's progress. He said to me in confidence, he says, Kate, I'm not allowed to say this to you, but I really feel that Aidan needs statutory assessment done, and that you need to speak to the principal about this and get this done as soon as possible. So the next morning, I went straight to the principal and said that I needed, that I really needed a statutory assessment for Aidan. The principal was not very forthcoming. He said that the waiting list for assessments would take a long time. You could be waiting years to get the support that Aidan needed to actually get a statutory assessment. At this point, we decided that we would go for private screening. So we had it. We went for a dyslexia screening, and the screening actually made us aware that actually Aidan was severely dyslexic, and that's what we were actually dealing with. And then I just want to think it's really important to mention at this time that by the end of P3, because Aidan had gone to school every single day, he couldn't actually do the work that he was given. He couldn't work independently. He was always in a constant state of anxiety. He felt really, really sick in his tummy every day. He kept saying to me, Mummy, my tummy's sick, my tummy's sick. He just felt really unwell. And it came to the stage where it was a real struggle to actually get him out of the house in the mornings. He was actually violent towards me. He would hit and scream. He would wreck his bedroom. So I had great problems actually getting him into school. So at this point for us, this was crisis point. Before the end of, sorry, I just find this very stressful. Sorry.
Yeah, take your time. There's no pressure.
Yeah, and because I have actually buried this in the past, so I'm like looking moving forward here. But anyway,
and Kate, only raise what you feel comfortable raising. Okay, there's no pressure.
Sorry, I'm just an emotional wreck. I'm sorry, I'm a mother and I'm an emotional wreck.
You're doing a great job.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate that. So anyway, where are we? So basically, yeah, all this distress and everything that happened, we were a crisis point. We didn't know what to do. Then we were told that we should actually contact the Children's Law Centre because they would be able to help. So at this point, I spoke to Liam, and I've spoken to Liam on numerous occasions from then, since then. But so in September, Liam had just said to me, Kate, you're going to wait forever. You're not going to be able to get the support that child needs. He knew how difficult things were for Aidan, for us as a family, and he recommended that I go through the process of going independently to the Education Authority and asking for a statutory assessment. So I was delighted that there actually was that option, because time was of the essence for us because things were so bad for Aidan. What I did was I basically sent an email to the Education Authority. They replied back saying, can you give us evidence to why you think your son needs a statutory assessment? There was a whole form of 11 questions, which was really complex and really difficult for me to fill out. But anyway, I managed to fill that out. Also, just to let you know as well, Chris, I'm dyslexic too, and I find the whole process very, very difficult, just in terms of filling out forms, giving evidence. So that's pretty complex for me as well. So anyway, I was delighted that I was able to do that process, and was hoping that this would really speed things up and give Aidan the support that he so desperately needed. At this point, Liam warned me that more than likely the Education Authority would turn down my request for a statutory assessment. And true to form, we received a letter on the 28th of September in 2018 stating that at this time they wouldn't do a statutory assessment for Aidan. So we were absolutely, completely gutted at this time, because things were a crisis point for us. Liam reassured me that this was normal procedure, and when we appealed, so what we decided to do was that we would appeal this decision. That's what we did. Again, this was another lengthy process that I had to undergo. Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. What else have I written here? So yeah, there's a whole load of forms. Again, complicated for me to do. At this point, I felt really, really completely stressed out of my mind. Then all of a sudden, just out of the blue, I think it was before Christmas time, we got a letter saying that Education Authority had now decided that they would carry out a statutory assessment. We were absolutely delighted. There was no reason why they had changed their mind. We had no idea. So I had put so much effort into the appeal process. So that was for me pointless and exhausting, a waste of several weeks. Again, Liam assured me that this was normal procedure for the EA. So during this time, I was lucky to have Liam to go back and forth to actually support us through the process, because it was just so stressful. Then when we finally got the statement, most people would think, hooray, that's great, you've got your statement, you're so lucky. But unfortunately, again, this was a really stressful time for us, because the statement was just completely vague. It didn't have specifics that Aidan really needed in place to actually help him. So then again, there was an ongoing lengthy process between me and the Education Authority. I was constantly asking for amendments, because from experience, from knowing other parents who've gone through this process, from chatting to Liam, that the Education Authority want to go out of their way to make things as complicated as possible, and to not meet the need for me, not meet the children's needs. And I didn't want there to be any misinterpretation within the statement, so that Aidan could actually get the help that he needed. So eventually, after 2 years of getting assistance from Liam, we got Aidan's statement in place in P5. Now, that actually involved me spending all of my summer back and forth, saying this needs to be in place, this needs to be in place. And for September, and he cannot go back to school without support. He won't be able to make it through the day. Things are so bad for Aidan. So finally, they agreed and got everything in place for P5. But then the next obstacle in P5 was when he went into P5, the two P4 classes in his school were amalgamated into one, and now Aidan was in a class of 37. But not only was he in a class with 37, he was given a classroom assistant who had just finished, who had just come out of training and had absolutely no experience of working with dyslexic children. So at this point, again, another crisis point for us. Spoke to Liam about it. We were at our wit's end, and we decided for us it was pretty traumatic to move Aidan's school. We had to move him at this point, because there was no way on this earth that Aidan's needs were going to be met in a classroom of 37 children with one teacher. There was no other classroom assistant and one inexperienced assistant that we felt just was not going to meet Aidan's needs. Now, before Aidan had actually moved to school at the start of September, he had actually received peripatetic support from the Education Authority, and that was a lady who came in, McKinless, and she provided one-to-one support for Aidan. Now, this support we found was really, really fantastic in terms of helping him with the spelling, helping them to blend, helping them to read, all the stuff all the specialist support that he really, really needed. Now, when I was asked to come in to meet Anne, she had said to me, Kate, I know that your statement isn't completely finalised, but I have been told by my boss that under no circumstances is Aidan to continue to get the peripatetic support when his statement is in place. So at this point, I was absolutely, completely horrified and shocked, because Aidan needed that peripatetic support. The classroom assistant and also the teacher had no training and no experience. They could not give him the one-to-one support he needed. So again, stressed again onto Liam, saying, what are we going to do? This child needs a specialist support. Liam said that we needed to go for a tribunal hearing. I was absolutely at my wit's end to this, but it had to be done. Again, another lengthy, difficult, complex process for me to complete all the forms. All time consuming, not user friendly. Also at this time, there was an option for me to go through DARS, that's the Dispute Avoidance and Resolution Service. I had decided to do both. So I continued with the tribunal process, but then I went down the route of DARS because you know what? I wanted to get this sorted as quickly as possible. I didn't want to go through the stress of a tribunal. That was the absolute last thing I needed. So anyway, then I went through a DARS process again, lengthy process, getting everyone together. For me, that process was a complete and utter waste of time because I met with the head of peripatetics. I met with the lady, the principal of Aiden's school, vice principal, his teacher. Everyone came together. But before we had even started the meeting, I had asked for Aiden's scores to see what differences it made to his learning, and I had tried to get the information. I didn't get the information until the day of the meeting. They handed me a booklet with all the information in his scores, and I knew at that very point that they had a criteria that they had put in place for their needs, but not Aiden's needs, and that criteria said that he didn't meet the need for ongoing support, which was the biggest load, crap I'd ever heard in my life, because Aiden had, yes, moved forward, but he had by no means closed the gap in his learning. He was way behind his peers. And he is in P7 now, and he still can't spell more than 3-letter words, but that's another issue. Yes.
Can I just come in? I'm just really keen to make sure that members get to interact with you on the
okay.
really important testimony that you're giving us today. Are there any key closing comments you'd like to make there before I do bring members in to engage with you?
If I could just come in there, come in there, Chris, in regards to it. So eventually, to end Kate's journey around that provision story, is eventually then in sort of August 2020, we had a sendest hearing, and at that sendest hearing, the tribunal granted Aiden 2 sessions per week of direct literacy support to the end of his primary school year and his classroom assistant. So it was at that point then, in September 2020, when she first contacted us in September 2018. In September 2020, Aiden eventually gets the provision that he needed. And Kate has given you, a flavour of that journey and the difficulties that she's went through in that 2 years and previously.
And Chris, can I just say one more paragraph before? This is from Aiden, and I think this is really, really, really important. He wanted me to interview him last night, and he was trying to help me prepare this for today. So he's a hoot. So anyway, I just said to him, Aiden, how was school before you got a statement and your classroom assistant? And he said, Mum, I could do no work. He said, I used to sit and look out the window. I used to daydream, couldn't do anything or join in the class. He said, I felt left out. He said, I felt sad, I felt stupid. And lots of times he says, Mum, I felt like crying. He said, I could not spell fox or cat. And his books were baby books. But what I want to say, I want to end now on a really, really positive note, in the sense that after Aiden has, for the last 2 years, has had a classroom assistant, his peripatetic support, his technology, laptop, and all the things that he's needed, he has said to me, school is better, I can do more, I can write, I can read books. Still takes a bit longer to do work, but I'm good at maths. Thank God he's good at maths. So homework is still a struggle, and I can, with the help of my classroom assistant, can create good stories. Okay, and this is the final thing I'm going to say. So last night at bedtime, Aidan said to me, Mum, you know what? I want to go for head boy of the school, which involves making a speech in front of the school. And I was like, oh my God, Aidan, that is absolutely amazing. So I just want to say, this is what the right support can do for a dyslexic child in Northern Ireland, which many estimate is 1 in 5 in every classroom. So thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for everybody's patience. And I could probably talk for another hour. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks so much, Kate. It's invaluable for us to hear from you today. It's hard. It's really, really hard, as it has been for us on a number of occasions, to hear the extent of the struggle that parents have to go through, and the assistance that they have to enlist from fantastic organisations like the Children's Law Centre before they get anywhere near accessing the support that their children need to achieve their own unique potential. So thank you so much for your testimony today.
Thank you.
But if I could bring members in at this point, please, to engage with the Children's Law Centre representatives and with Kate. And we will have about 6 minutes max each for questions. I'll forego questions to give you guys as much time as possible. And can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Rachel, Liam, and Kate. Kate, thank you particularly. That I can just tell how difficult that was to come on and tell Aidan's story, but you did a great job of doing it, and it really it's really important that you do share Aidan's story so we can kind of see the real impact it has. And what really struck with me there when you were telling Aidan's story is how not only was it affecting his education, but also him outside of school and having that there sick feeling going into school. Nobody wants to hear the child feeling like that there. So my heart really does break for you. But as you said, to end with a positive note, and he's moving on to bigger, better things. So I'm really pleased with that for you. Again, I was at the meeting, the informal meeting with Dyslexia Awareness NI, and I kind of left with that same feeling of just the parents being so frustrated that they have to put up such a big fight to get the simplest resources, and which would have such a massive impact on the children. And as well, from your testimony there, not just on the children but their families, because that's been obviously a really stressful number of years for all of you. So it is frustrating to know that you have to have such a big fight just to get, let's say, simple interventions and support. And I suppose I'll move on to my questions, but I really appreciate you, Kate, coming in and telling us your story there. This maybe is for Rachel and Liam then, but it's more so about the actual assessment process. Can you give me a kind of sense of the process for assessment of somebody who thinks their child has dyslexia? Is it timely, and how is it dealt with?
Thanks, Nicola. I'll take that. Educators would be best placed really to answer that question rather than lawyers. But I can tell you what we've seen through our casework, I suppose, which is that traditionally it would have been educational psychologists who would have screened and assessed for dyslexia. But as time went on, I think the EA realised that was an unsustainable way of identifying children early enough because of the difficulties of getting access to psychology slots at the time. And then there was training rolled out to enable people other than educational psychologists to carry out screening. So SENCOs in schools, psychology assistants and so on, just to broaden the net a little bit. And that has helped a bit. And I know one of my clients that I spoke about earlier had benefited from that and was identified in P3, which you might say, well, that's reasonable because, difficulties started to emerge in P2, as we typically hear. By P3, things definitely weren't right. The child was screened and they were identified. The problem was that once they were identified, nothing happened other than school did everything that they possibly could within their own resources. But when I spoke to school, it was school that referred it to me. They sent me a list about 2 pages long of all of the strategies and interventions that they had in place. They were quite a dyslexia-friendly school, and they had put specific strategies in place for that particular child and exhausted them all. And they were saying to me, we don't want any more advice and strategies. We know what we're doing. We've done what we can within our specialism. And now this child needs specialist support from a qualified literacy teacher. So schools don't have enough access to those teachers. And sometimes I find in statement cases, it's the school that maybe hires a sub to do the literacy support rather than the EA service. And the question arises there about the consistency of what level of qualification and specialisation the teachers have. We know that the EA literacy service is staffed by specialist teachers, but we need to have consistent, high level, high quality provision. And we need to have it early. And the EA itself, I'm sure, would agree with that. I know they would agree with that, and they want to intervene early, but they simply don't have the resources or the evidence-based strategies to provide the consistent service early.
And so, just to follow on, so what happens, Nicola, if you're waiting, if you can see as a parent the child is having difficulties and you're waiting on something to happen, as Kate was, and nothing's happening, eventually, one of the most common pieces of advice we give is to advise parents to request statutory assessments themselves. We know that, if you wait through the school processes, time's ticking. The life of a child is, it's very short compared to our life. So 6 months in a child's life, there's so much that can happen. So, we would advise parents to go and request those statutory assessment themselves. We know that where parents pursue that through appeal, in 100% of cases, the Education Authority will carry out that assessment, and that's what gives you, and at the end of the day, that's what gives you the clear indications of where your child's at. That's what sets out where their attainments are and where their ability is, and that's what sets the framework for deciding what provision that child's going to need.
And Liam, is that statutory assessment and a private assessment?
No, that's an assessment by the Education Authority's education psychologist, because that's the only way you're going to open up services. So the education psychologist service at the EA, they're the gatekeepers. They hold the keys to all the services, to statements, stage 3 services, including direct literacy support. So if you're never seen by an education psychologist employed by the EA, you're not getting any service from the EA.
Again, it's just really frustrating, isn't it, that you have to know how to work the system almost. Rachel, just back.
That's 1 minute or so to go there, Nicola. Okay. Thanks.
Rachel, just back to your point there about even getting the assessment and the dyslexia being identified as then needing that support beyond that, and that's an issue we've come up against with the range of special educational needs. I'm thinking particularly with autism, just because we've had the autism bill there recently, and we've been doing quite a bit of work on that there. And another issue with autism diagnosis was that there was this kind of disparity between trusts throughout the north and getting that diagnosis. So can you tell me, is that maybe the same with dyslexia, or is there more consistency across north with dyslexia identification?
Well, with dyslexia, you're dealing with the Education Authority, which is now one regional authority. So in theory, we should have the capacity to have a consistent framework, but we're not there yet. And essentially the EA has a lot of work to do to get us into a position where we have a consistent pathway from stage 1 to stage 5. There's absolutely no excuse not to help these children. It's a high prevalence disability, dyslexia, specific learning disability, and we know how to help. There's a whole range of strategies that are evidence-based, and they need to be put in place, because learning to read and write is fundamental to all of your other educational opportunities. And it's the same with other high prevalence difficulties. There needs to be continuous CPD in schools so that schools can maximise their own resources and then also access EA resources when they need to.
Yeah, and we know nothing works better than direct literacy support teaching. That works for children. It needs properly resourced, and it needs to be available to children early when they need it, because if you don't do it early, you're stacking up the difficulties for those children through their school career.
Yeah, no, listen, I agree with both of you. And say there is just that real sense of frustration that the help is there. We know what it's needed. It's just getting it out to the kids. But listen, I really appreciate both you, Rachel and Liam, coming on, and Kate, as I say, for sharing your and Aidan's story. And you've my full support. I'll keep raising these issues for you. So thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. Can I bring in Robin Newton, MLA, please? Robin, I think you might need to unmute your device. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And can I thank Rachel and Liam, and especially Kate, for being with us today. An absolutely wonderful result out of a very dedicated battle, I'll use that word, on behalf of Aidan. And I do hope that he does realise his ambition, and that he does challenge for the post of head boy. And it would be really lovely to see him making that speech, presumably to the whole school. And what a wonderful example that would be to other children who find themselves in a same situation, and indeed for the parents who are seeking the support. So well done to Kate, and every success to Aidan. I wonder, Chair, could I just concentrate my remarks in two areas? And Kate has placed the emphasis on the need for peripatetic support. And this may not be a question that the panel are able to answer, and it may be that we need to follow up on this, Chair. And we have talked about on this in the committee previously. We've talked about the importance of continuing professional development for teachers. But obviously, Kate found that the peripatetic support was the need, was the key that unlocked much for Aidan. Perhaps we could have maybe some comments around that peripatetic support and how easy it is, or what support there is available there, as distinct from the continuing professional development, which I would be a keen supporter of. And indeed, in the early stages, Chair, what is the experience of who takes the lead in this area, and any responsibilities that health might have in the area? And just to finish, Chair, then, is there a school that has maybe an ethos that is an example, a prevailing ethos that marks out the school as having recognised dyslexia and is addressing the issue on a school-wide basis, in support of that community within the school?
Who wants?
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, Rachel, you might be on mute there, I think. Sorry,
pressed the wrong button. Thank you.
No problem.
Can I just endorse Aidan for head boy while I have the opportunity? So Aidan for head boy. Good luck with that speech, Aidan.
He's building quite a campaign team here.
Yes, he could be a politician by the end of this.
He's got the education committee as a campaign team and the children's law centre.
That's a good start to the campaign, I think. Yes, the peripatetic support, access to it is strictly limited, and it's governed by the provisional criteria, which is a set of criteria drafted by the Education Authority to try and decide who should access peripatetic teaching support. And that was what I mentioned earlier when I talked about you have to have an IQ of 90, and you have to fall in the bottom 2% of the population in terms of having the highest attainment gap. So the gap between what you're able to do and what you can achieve. So essentially, those people who are non-functional. So we're leaving people to a stage where they're absolutely non-functional before we intervene. When actually perhaps 10% of the population may well have dyslexia. So there's an issue there. There's also a legal issue with the rigid application of such criteria, because these are not, in my view, lawful. And if they're being applied rigidly with no exceptionality, then that's susceptible to judicial review. And we've certainly challenged these criteria where we can, because we don't agree with them. But it's particularly been evident with dyslexia how that has closed the door in the faces of children with dyslexia in terms of receiving support from those specialist teachers who really do know how to help them. And we've seen,
Rachel, sorry, not to take too much of Rob's time. Sorry, but those limitations, are they resource driven?
I would say they're resource driven. They have to be resource driven. They're not needs driven, because we're hearing from Kate. I think Kate spoke very eloquently, and it was very distressing. We got a real sense of the utter trauma that family has gone through for years, and they're not finished yet, because Aidan still has lots of work to do to catch up, because he's been left so long without that support. But he will do well because he has the support now. And that criteria needs to be very critically reassessed and urgently. I think there needs to be a full review of this service, of the access to it, the gateway in, how the outcomes are measured, how the pupils are monitored. We need to see measurable progress. And that's the thing about dyslexia. You can measure the progress really easily by doing baseline assessments and follow-up assessments. We've seen those in sets of papers. So that's the difficulty with access to that. In terms of cooperation, Robin, you'd asked about who should take the lead and about health intervention. Health intervention comes in maybe when children develop comorbid mental health difficulties, because they're so overwhelmed every single day, going into school feeling sick, wet in their beds, calling themselves stupid, looking all around at their fellow pupils, reading, writing, enjoying their school and making progress. And the effect on that individual child is just absolutely devastating from a mental health and child development point of view. So the schools are very often left to take the lead. So in 98% of cases, I would say, the school is left to take the lead with the resources that they have. The parent, I suppose, as well, we should say, we've heard from Kate how she had to take the lead herself. Parental participation is extremely important in this, and I had the pleasure of attending the all-party group on parental participation yesterday, and we heard from them about the importance of parental connection with the school community, so that these parties can work together in the best interests of children. But also the EA needs to provide its part. The health service might need to provide its part. Children don't just come along and they're just dyslexic. You'll have a whole range of different profiles. They could have dyspraxia, developmental coordination difficulties, autism, ADHD, physical difficulties, all sorts of different combinations. So one size fits all isn't right. Advice and strategies and CPD are all good basis for an inclusive school, but they're not the solution to the issue of a child who's stuck and can't get moving on. And finally, asked about school ethos and is there an example? There will be good examples out there of schools who are doing absolutely the best they can and exhibit best practice, and that best practice should be collected and shared to bring up all schools to the highest standards they can get to. I think the new SEND framework wants to do that, and I hope that it will achieve that. So we need built capacity in schools. We also need built capacity within the EA peripatetic teaching service. As others have said, that is the one where we can see objectively measurable progress, value for public money, and value for that child, that, you know, values added to their school experience, and that they can reach their aspirations and goals as they grow up.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe it's just a follow-up question. I know Rachel had said that there is good practice, and I'm sure there is, but is there a school that stands out in any way in addressing this issue?
I couldn't identify one individual school. You know, I come across different schools with different standards. Maybe educationalists themselves or even the likes of the EA might be able to point to examples of good practice. I know you're going to hear from the service. They might actually be able to point you in the direction of an individual school. Yeah. I'm not able to do that, sorry.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Can I bring in Justin McNulty, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. October is recognised worldwide as Dyslexia Awareness Month. Time to come together, raise awareness, share resources, and tell stories about dyslexic successes. Richard Branson, Whoopi Goldberg, Tom Cruise, Keira Knightley, Steven Spielberg, Albert Einstein, Jennifer Aniston, Muhammad Ali, and Aidan McKeown all have dyslexia, and they are dyslexia successes, and we should celebrate them. But in terms of raising awareness, my God, what a wonderful job you guys have done this morning in terms of your delivery and your presentation. And we need to pay credit to Jodie Snowden, Ali Lewis, Nikki Humphreys, who are all very active in terms of Danny. And the power of their presentation to other informal briefing was extraordinary. It's troubling. It's troubling to hear.
Sorry to cut across you. Can I just check that everybody else has their devices on mute, as your audio is not as clear as I would want it to be, given the contribution that you're making. So if we could just check everyone else is on mute, and then try again with you there, Justin. Thank you.
Kit, your and Aidan's and your husband's story was troubling. It was a story of climbing Mount Everest in a storm. And that's not what parents should be experiencing. I have the same case, I have a case in my office with a young lady in the same position as you, a determined mother trying to get what her son is entitled to, or sorry, what her daughter is entitled to. And talk to me about the experience of the sickness in the child's stomach going to school every day, not wanting to go to school, the fear of going to school, and the impact it has on not the child alone, the whole family, the whole wider circle. So there's a ripple effect. The fact that this hasn't been identified early enough within kids, and they're not getting the support that they have a right to. And in terms of that, give me the figures that Danny presents are 1 in 10 children have autism, right? So 350,000 children and young people at school in the north right now. How many people? So are we saying 35,000 people in school right now in the north with dyslexia? And are those 35,000 children and young people, are they getting the supports they need?
I think one of the issues you've identified there, Justin, is the lack of data. There's a lack of coherent data so that we know how many children there are, what stage are they at. There's school level data, there's EA level data, there's DE data, there's information held by parents, children and young people. And that's why I say we need to employ the Children's Services Cooperation Act and think about the statutory duty to cooperate there in collecting data, in planning a service. There are statistics available, which I spoke about at the beginning of my presentation, but I think those statistics, when you compare them with what Danny is saying, reveal that there is a gap somewhere in the data. And the casework that the Children's Law Centre and others are doing reveals that there's a gap in the data. I know other people have said to me they've tried to access data and haven't been able to retrieve the relevant data. And I think we need a full analysis of this particular service. It could be used as a forerunner for reviewing other services, because I think dyslexia services is one where you could do a really good stringent review of the access criteria, the interventions, the evidence-based outcomes, and how children get on, what happens at the end of it, which is what we're here to talk about, their successes and doing well at school. But we need that to really be taken apart and looked at very closely about how we collect the data to form the evidence base to create the policy to roll it out to children. I don't think we have that data. We have, estimations.
Yeah, the reality is, even the small percentage of that 35,000 children who've been identified as dyslexic, whose needs have been identified, aren't even getting the services that they require. So in answer to your question, are those 35,000 children getting the services they require? The answer is no.
What redress is available for children? Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
Sorry, can I just say at this point, I just think it's really, really important then that these dyslexic children should be screened, in P2, P1, P2. Why can't that happen? That should be something that automatically happens for all kids, so they can be screened and identified. And I think if the children know that actually they're not stupid, but they actually are just dyslexic. And dyslexic people, as you just started off your presentation or your discussion, pointing out that it is Dyslexia Awareness Month, and all these capable dyslexic people have made such a contribution to our society. And I think it's important as well that schools lift the negativity around being dyslexic. Because it's okay to be dyslexic, because dyslexic people have so many talents, but they actually just struggle to read, write and spell, memories and their short-term memory and organising things. But I think that needs to be incorporated into the schools as well, because I think there's so much shame around being dyslexic, and also parents don't want their children to be maybe screened for dyslexia because they think, oh my God, my child's going to be labelled stupid. So it's lots of parents mightn't even be for the screening as well. So I think that's just something else that needs to be addressed as well. Sorry for interrupting there.
But a minute to go, Justin. Thank you.
I appreciate we're short in time. Two quick questions. What redress is available to parents, such as Kate, who have identified that their child hasn't had the support that they are entitled to and they have a right to? What redress is available to them? And what is the opinion of you all in terms of the level of dyslexia training provided to teachers at this point in time?
Just in relation to your first question, Justin, the redress is to, as Kate did, pursue the appeals process. It's lengthy. It requires a lot of energy for parents, and it's traumatic, but that's the only avenue open to you. And unfortunately, at the Children's Law Centre, we're flat out helping parents with special education needs achieve the provision their child needs, but we only see the tip of the iceberg. Do you know what I mean? Teachers, parents groups, support groups, they all need to be aware of the process around getting redress and getting the provision that the child needs, so that every child is able to access the provision that Aidan's currently getting.
Can I stop you? When I say redress, I mean, too little, too late is a major issue here. So early intervention is crucial and critical. For the children who've been left behind too far, who's gone beyond help and support, who've been left really behind. How do them parents seek redress on that issue?
Well, there is the potential of educational negligence, but educational negligence is a very novel area of law. There's only been a handful of cases in the whole of the United Kingdom in the 15 years since the very first case of educational negligence. So in reality, there is no redress. You can only fight to get the provision in place that your child needs, but there's nobody going to come and compensate you for the damage done or the loss that's been been incurred by the family, and that stress and trauma that the family have had to go through in order to get to the place you need to be. There is no redress, unfortunately, Justin. You can go to the ombudsman if you suspect that there's been a maladministration in how your child's needs have been dealt with. And there are numerous cases with the ombudsman's office at the minute in respect to that. But apart from that, there isn't anything.
If I could just add to that, in my view, the only way to fix this is through a solution such as scrutiny, such as we're having now, and through EA operational improvement and proper resourcing. We have tried to take it through the courts. We got it all up the way up to the Court of Appeal, and even the court felt powerless to act and looked at the department for the solution. So I too would look to the department for the solution under the Education Authority, and for them to involve all relevant stakeholders in really looking deep down at this and how are we going to fix this. If we're bringing through a new SEND framework, it needs to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
Justin, can I carry your question over for another member there in terms of the teacher training?
Of course.
Thanks very much. Thanks for that, Justin. Thank you. Robbie Butler, MLA, you might want to ask about the extent to which dyslexia awareness is included in teacher training. Robbie?
Chris, that'll lead up into my 6 minutes, but if I did that. Listen, I'll be brief, and if someone wants to briefly respond to that one, they can, because he will use up my time. But Kate, thanks very much for that. And Justin, I'm not going to double down on it, but Justin made me smile just with the tribute that he made to Aidan and to yourself, and for your delivery. I think that only a mum can do. So well done, absolutely fabulous. Excellent name. You're already known to me, so I'm just going to get straight into my question. So, Rachel, if you want to come back to that question that the chair asked, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions if you can take note of them. When the Education Library Boards then moved into the guise of the Education Authority, and there was that sort of supposed to be efficiency move, what changed for dyslexic children? Did it improve at all? Did it not? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. I'm interested also in the early diagnosis piece. So obviously, and Kate gave an indication of how that wasn't the case there. I want to push it a wee bit further and say, are we actually tackling it early enough? Is there anything that can be done in early years to identify, look at it and identify it even earlier? And looking at the, obviously we know that the earliest identification and intervention will give us the best results. And thirdly, then, I think rather than take any more time, I'm going to ask maybe, and someone can maybe give us an indication of the change that the help made to Aidan. Can someone maybe explain what the change means even in the longer term? Because some of the stuff that we have seen shows the lifelong impact of not getting intervention and support appropriately affects long-term life outcomes. So can someone explain what it means when you do get that support and what actually changes? Thank you, Chair.
If I'll just maybe start off there with the teacher training. I mean, we're not educationalists, we're lawyers, so we're not sort of all over the facts in terms of the teacher training. So educationalists would be able to give views on that in terms of their training. But I do know that Dyslexia Awareness Northern Ireland have raised the issue of training, and they have called for mandatory training because of the high prevalence of this particular difficulty. Because if 98% of the dyslexic population is relying on teachers to and school staff to identify their dyslexia, or to at least see that there's an issue and refer it to someone who can identify it, then they need to be able to know what to look for. So I think there's merit in the argument that there ought to be mandatory training, and at the very least regular training for all staff who are working directly with children who may or may not have literacy difficulties at some point in their education. In relation to the change from the 5 boards to the Education Authority, there was a review of the provision carried out. I think the Education Authority had come to see us in about 2018 to explain the changes, and they had also come to see members of the subgroup, an education subgroup of CDSA, which is the Children with Disabilities Strategic Alliance, and had been framed as a consultation with us. But actually it was more of an explanation of what was being done rather than a consultation. And the only real change that I could see was that they wanted to make it a regional approach. They wanted to really ingrain this idea of advice and strategies as an intervention, whereas I don't think that is an intervention. I think that's an inclusion issue where all schools should have access to advice and strategies for all children who need them. Intervention to me is direct intervention for those who require it. The only change that I saw coming out of that rationalisation by the Education Authority was the removal of a group of children, I think it was in the northern area, who were receiving peripatetic support, who had moderate learning difficulties. Because we have to remember that children with IQs below 90 can also make significant progress in some cases if they have peripatetic literacy support. So what about a child with an IQ of 89, 88, 87, 86, and so on? If the difficulty is truly more of a moderate learning difficulty, or some other, maybe autism is the difficulty, sometimes the peripatetic teaching doesn't create the progress, and then you know that it's something else. So it's a way of also finding out what the child needs long term. So, I mean, long and short, CDSA wasn't overly content with the new framework at the time. We were a bit sceptical about it, and thought there were gaps in the data and so on, as we do now. And our continuous experience of these cases coming back through our phone line and through the email will tell me that whatever the EA has done to regionalise it, they need to do more. And they need more resourcing in order to be able to do more in terms of early intervention. How early can you intervene? Well, as early as possible is really the answer to that question. I think we would need to ask the question about when can diagnosis be made, how early. That would have to be asked of someone like an educational psychologist who has the expertise to answer that question. But typically in the cases we see, it'll be, and Kate reflected this perfectly, it'll be primary 2. And then when you go out of the foundation stage and into the more active reading, writing, numbers, phonics, P3, P4, children going up a step and up a step, you start to see them falling behind. But I think your point is, well, why should they fall behind? And how early can they be screened? How early can they get school level intervention? How early can they get EA level intervention? They should get what they need when they need it, but we need to identify them in order to be able to do that. And you also asked what has been the difference made to Aidan, so I'm going to leave that with Kate, because only she knows the answer to that. What the difference that the support has actually made to Aidan, or what difference it will make as he moves forward.
All right, okay. The difference it's made, well, do you know what? He doesn't feel, he's always felt from about the age of 7 that he's stupid. So he now that I sort of been chatting to him about it, he feels that, you know, that he's good at doing certain things now, and that he is capable of achieving, because he has the right sort of help. Also as well, he feels that he's less isolated. I think that he felt quite isolated because he couldn't actually do the basics that all the rest of his peers could do. And also he felt a lot of shame, a great shame. Even when his friends came to call for him at home, he had to hide his reading books because he was afraid that anyone would see his reading. And now with that support in place, he's now trying. We have a challenge. His challenge is to read his first ever chapter book. Jamie Oliver's done it and he's 38. So Aidan McKeown is determined to do it in P7. So that's his goal. So that's amazing. That's something we never thought would ever happen. Also, when he's out and about now, he's trying to read signs. He now unfortunately can read my text messages, which he could never do before. So you really can't keep anything from him. So I think he feels so much better about himself. He feels more capable. He wants to be a writer. He's absolutely amazingly creative. He's so fortunate to have his classroom assistant. He dictates all his stories, and he is so happy that he can actually achieve. So getting the right support for him has been absolutely life-changing, not only for him but for his dad and myself.
Yeah, and the flip side of that, Robbie, is for those children who don't get the support.
We're going to say that misdiagnosed too. Yes.
Let me bring Robbie in. I think he's almost out of time, but he might want to ask one final question or comment there. Thanks.
Do you know something? I was going to ask something else, but I'm actually happy enough if Liam picks up on this one, that there are children who possibly don't get that support. They're undiagnosed and misdiagnosed. What's the prognosis? What happens to those kids, and what's the likely outcome for those?
Absolutely. I mean, the flip side is for those, Kate's touched on some of the frustrations that Aidan was having at a very early young age. So you can imagine as you progress through education, so you get to P6 and P7 and you're a clever child, but you can't follow the class and the reading materials and everything else that your peers are doing. That's going to come out as frustration. You're going to sit in a classroom where your frustration is going to come out in behaviour episodes and things like that. As you move on to post-primary, it's going to become a frustration with the actual educational experience. So more and more pupils then become disengaged from education. And there's been various surveys done in terms of children in the JJC and prisoners in prisons. The amount of adults and older children in those institutions who have undiagnosed dyslexia tells its own story. Do you know what I mean? So the failure to make that early intervention, that early provision, has massive repercussions, not only for those individual children, but for society in general.
And also, can I just say, Robbie, as well, that luckily for Aidan, he has a mother who's a complete fighter, and I will never ever give up fighting for Aidan's niece. But what about all those children whose parents just aren't able to, for whatever reason? And it is absolutely tragic that those poor children should just be left. I'm a teacher assistant. I see it every single day at school, and it actually absolutely breaks my heart. And there's no reason for it. There's everything that these kids need. They just need to be put in place. That's all that needs to happen.
Okay, Robert.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Can I bring in Diane Dodds, please? Diane Dodds, MLA.
Thank you, everyone, and particularly Kate, for this story. A word of caution to Aidan: having a bunch of politicians fighting his corner in any election might not actually really be help the street cred in any shape or form. So just a word of caution on that. Kate, you tell a story that I mean, one of the biggest elements of the caseload that I have at the minute is with the EA. Parents of children with special education needs who are absolutely distraught at how to get through the system. Yeah. And somehow or other, you think that when you have this child that needs a little bit of extra help, that everybody will come jumping from every corner and say, I'm here to help you, and everything will be grand. And nothing could be further from the truth. And I actually think that's a terrible indictment, both on our society and on the way we treat children and young people with special education needs. So really and truly, Aidan is a lucky little boy in many ways, that he has had parents who can fight for him. And as you say, there are many, many other children who can't. There's a couple of things that I'm really interested in. One, Rachel, it's the gap between those who are defined as can get help and those who are somewhere in that huge big group in the middle, where you say at least 10% of that school population may well have dyslexia, but help is not readily available to them. And I'm presuming you're looking at some kind of formula where we can get some greater degree of evidence on those people and how we will do it. And I'd just like you to maybe to expand on that. And on that kind of, and I wrote it down where you talked about the rigid, narrow definition of those who need help. Is that dictated by funds, or is that dictated by lack of knowledge or lack of data on how that's done? Again, both you and Liam and indeed Kate talked about early intervention. And in Aidan's story, I noted that it was really P2 before he was really starting to get some level of intervention that was responding to his need. How can we do that better? Because I think that that's key to how we do that. I know that you're talking about scoping the unmet need and that there's no consistency in the data. And I suspect that that's not just for children with dyslexia, but a very wide range of conditions. Really so, I mean, if there were three things that you were asking this education committee to do, what would they be?
Thanks, Diana. I'll just come in there. I mean, I think the first thing that we need to do is review the stage 3 services to see if they're operating efficiently and if we're getting value for public money. And this is something that the Northern Ireland Audit Office has raised concerns about. There needs to be an independent eye cast over this particular service and other stage 3 services. The reason being that these are non-statutory services and it's very difficult to access them through legal methods, which is why we often have to go to the statutory assessment or to the judicial review. You shouldn't have to battle, as you say exactly. When you have a child with special needs, you expect help to arrive. Help is not arriving, as we all know very well. The evidence is out there. Who has it? Parents have it. Schools have lots and lots of evidence. Schools are crying out for this help. The EA holds evidence, the department will have some evidence, and so on, and the health service may have some evidence. And that's why I say there needs to be a coherent way of collecting the data at some level where we can actually measure what's happening in this service. Who has dyslexia? What intervention are they getting? If they're at stage 1 of the code of practice, how long have they been on stage 1? If they're at stage 2, how long have they been at? So we're going to have PLPs coming in through the new SEND framework. We currently have individual education plans, or IEPs. So school will put the child on an IEP maybe quite early. It could be in primary 1, for example, and they'll maybe notice that something's not working, and they'll put strategies in place, and then they might go to stage 2, and there might be a wider inquiry and other strategies put in place. But what we consistently see is, I think schools are nearly at the point where they know there's no point in asking, because they're not going to get the help's not coming to them either. They also need the help. So it's about identifying who needs this help, what help do they need, at what level do they need it, how long do they need it for, putting time limits around the help, measuring the success, using the IEP. We've got the structure there to do that. And I think the reluctance to gather the coherent data would be because it would show up a level of need that we don't have the resources to fund. But we have to allocate the funding in a fair way, looking at the Section 75 groupings who are protected by law, for example, and target the funding to those who are most vulnerable and need it most. So we need to have evidence-based policy based on full consultation with all relevant stakeholders. And I think an outside independent inquiry into how this operates would provide that, and that could allow for collection of data from education professionals, from health professionals, from parents, from children and young people with experience of this, because they, we have a parent here speaking today from the heart and soul and from her experience, and her child would also have things to say, and he has spoken through his mother today, but the children can speak for themselves. They're perfectly capable of speaking for themselves and saying what their experience is, and, what impact did the help have on you? Did it work? How long did it go on? What do you need? So we need to do that consultation and evidence gathering exercise and really proper scrutiny. And we're focusing on dyslexia today because it's Dyslexia Awareness Week, but there's other services similar as well. But I think this one in particular would bear up to scrutiny because we could really objectively measure progress. How are we doing that? So that's a sort of a long-winded answer to the question. I think it's a difficult question. And the people in charge of the system need to be looking at that question and the answers to it. Yeah. The rigid definition is absolutely governed by the lack of resources. It's a resource-driven definition. It has to be, because we can see the impact of it on children. When they did an EQIA on that provision, we objected to the revision quite strongly and said that we thought it would have inequalities, unequal impacts in our society, and lo and behold, it has. So, to me, that provisional criteria was put in place pending the EA being operational in the new SEND framework and so on. That criteria needs to be looked at very closely by people who understand dyslexia. The likes of Dyslexia Awareness Northern Ireland, that there's educationists in that group, there's parents, there's a source right there of lots of information and evidence, and they have thought about this very carefully. Early intervention, the answer to that question is you can't intervene too early. You cannot intervene too early, but you can only intervene when you know what you're looking for. And if we look at looking for a needle in a haystack, it's the same with disability discrimination. You have to be looking for it sometimes in order to find it. So the teachers who are left with custody of 37 children we heard today need to have the tools and the support available to them to hone in on the individual. They do tests of children to see what their IQ scores are, and they can identify trends in classrooms. But at the individual level, this needs to be looked at. Individual support needs to be put in place as early as possible. And as you said, Diane, as well, this is not just an issue of dyslexia. This applies all across the SEND system, and every MLA in this room knows that, because they've all got lots and lots of constituents coming for help in relation to SEN. And that tells us all that, we need a very close look at the early intervention. If we can improve the system to make the early intervention happen at stages 1 to 3 of the Code of Practice, we're going to solve a whole world of problems at stages 4 and 5. We won't need as many statutory assessments, as many statements, as many CAMS appointments, as many people going into the criminal justice system, running the streets trying to belong somewhere because they did no good in school and they weren't happy, so they look somewhere else.
Do you find, Rachel, that some people skip the non-statutory bit to go straight to the statutory bit? Because it's the only way that they will actually find help,
Yeah.
and where legally the EA will have to provide help.
Yes. We use statutory assessment as a legal enforcement tool. We went to the courts on stage 3 and the Court of Appeal couldn't help us. That says something about our system when our Court of Appeal couldn't help the children at stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3, and we are left to rely on that as non-statutory, non-enforceable provision. So that leaves us, if we're trying to legally support a family, we have to get it before a tribunal. The tribunal is an expert panel with members on it who are experienced, and they usually, if it's a dyslexia case, so we've all been there, I think, parents and MLAs and lawyers and advocates alike. Those panels are experts, and they've seen this dyslexia type case coming before them for many years, which is why they look at the evidence and make an evidence-based decision. And we have yet, Liam, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, we've yet to lose a dyslexia case. Now, that's not because the SENDIST is just giving out these judgments like sweeties. It's because they're looking at the evidence and they're making an evidence-based decision, and they're looking at the law and the legal threshold tests, and they're making a legal-based decision, and it's in the best interests of children. So I think the answer to the problems is independent scrutiny of these services, proper evidence in which to base the policies, which is based on full consultation, and making sure that intervention, exactly what Kate said, children need to get the intervention at the time they need it. So the money that we have should be poured towards early intervention. We can't leave children in this situation. It's a breach of their human rights. It is negligence. Could take educational negligence cases. It's too late then. Negligence is only proven when the damage has been done and there's no GCSEs to be had. So we need to act early, and it's incumbent on all of us to do everything we can to make that happen.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one very quick question?
Final question, Diane. Thanks.
Which is, I mean, many years ago, as a teacher, I used to teach literacy to children in small groups, and it was probably one of the most rewarding things that I did. But actually, I was a teacher in a secondary school in Lisburn, so it was very late in those children's lives for that. Could continuous professional development, greater awareness among teachers at an early stage, and the ability and the funding to give some release to those teachers help us to avoid the statutory assessments and help us to intervene earlier?
Absolutely. That's key to it. I mean, if all schools were properly resourced and had those properly trained teachers who were able to intervene at those early P1, P2 stages, then of course you would have less children going forward for statutory assessments. You'd have less need for parents to take control and request those assessments themselves, because it's not through, it's really frustration that leads parents down that road, because yourself, Diane, parents are, coming to you or coming to us because they're frustrated, because they're talking to teachers. Teachers are frustrated because what they've essentially got is a very scarce resource with increasing demands, and the education authority in control of it. So the only thing that determines their decisions is resources. The tribunals are able to make different decisions because they have no regard to the resources. They're solely focused on the needs being presented before them. That's why 93% of cases are won, So, I think if it was any other area of law other than children's education, where decisions made by the statutory body, 93% of them on appeal were turned out to be wrong, there would be a massive public outcry. I'm just not sure if that's the case for SNAN, but it should be, because any system where 93% of the decisions are flawed should come under serious scrutiny, and there should be serious questions asked about those decisions.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Liam, just to double check there, 93% appeal success, is that particular to dyslexia?
No, that's for all special education needs and disability tribunals since 2013.
Okay. Thank you. Can I bring in Harry Harvey, MLA, to finish, please? Thanks.
Okay, and thank you very much, Chair. Much appreciated. And if I was going to describe today's meeting, it certainly would be heartfelt and has indeed touched a chord with us all. Kate, I'd have to say to yourself, only for your early intervention, it would have been much more difficult for you than now. and all you've done made a huge difference. And like others, I would worry how many other children could potentially be missed if they're not as observant as you are and have been. We're all so grateful for this. And also to Liam there, I have to say, we're also grateful for and thankful for the Liams of this world. We know with what all you said, Liam, it's not just a job. We're much appreciative of that. A question would be, posed to yourself, Liam, really, on the recent recommendations from the PAC. I was going to say which one would be most useful, but probably be more, would you say the recommendations from the Public Accounts Committee are useful? Thank you.
No, absolutely. The audit office report, the internal audit report, and of course the commissioner's report as well are all very useful, and they all paint the same picture, Harry, of a service and a system that's very much broken. And Rachel had mentioned earlier, in terms of this current issue around dyslexia, the need for a review, complete review of all those services. I mean, that's the number one recommendation in the commissioner's report, too little, too late. So, obviously, Sarah Long, since she came into the office, has initiated some reviews around the Education Authority and taken on board the recommendations of the Audit Office and the Commissioner. And she's new in post. She's got a blank canvas. So hopefully she can bring in some of the changes that affect and make a real difference for children. We talked this morning about some of those changes, but the big one for me would be that complete review of those specialist services all across the board.
Can I just say something as well, Liam? I completely agree with what you're saying. My issue is just, it needs to be done really quickly. These poor kids have suffered so much, and I hear everyone saying, we need a review, but how quickly can this be done? Because these kids need help now. They needed it yesterday, they needed it years ago. So how quickly can we get all these changes, all the needs of these kids sorted as quickly as possible?
Yeah.
Time is so important.
Hopefully the committee can exert their influence. They have a massive influence on all of these things. So the committee, everybody seems to be agreed in terms of the kind of changes and the kind of processes that we want to see. So, hopefully yourselves and the committee can drive that whole process forward.
Yeah, that's okay. Many thanks, and thank you, Rachel, there also. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Harry.
Could I just add one final comment to that, because I know we're under pressure for time, but when reviews are taking place, what we don't want to see is they're coming to us as a done deal. This is what we've decided to do. Because that's an ill-informed approach. We want a sort of a co-design type approach where everybody who's a stakeholder is involved in feeding into it, and we can see what's happening and what decisions are being made, as opposed to just, here's our policy. There needs to be openness and transparency. And just to add as well, in the interests of fairness, the Education Authority has met with me to discuss their fail rate in sendest appeals and to start to look at the reasons for why that might be occurring. So I think that's a positive thing. I think the EA is actually looking into that. And hopefully the decision making will improve as a result of that, but that remains to be seen. But just to be fair, the improvement process is obviously ongoing, and I'll watch that with interest.
Thanks, Rachel. Rachel, Liam, Kate, thanks so much for your evidence today. It hopefully will be really helpful in informing our next session with the Education Authority, and hopefully you'll get a chance to view the evidence that they give and the answers that we're able to secure in relation to the key actions that need to be taken to improve support services for pupils like Aidan with dyslexia in our schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thanks all.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Okay, can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove witnesses and to add members back into the spotlight? Clark, would you like to summarise briefly any of the key actions, and then we'll move on to the Education Authority. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. I think a lot of those points will inform the next session. That'll carry on quite seamlessly through. And really the issues that members have already been digging into are those that are germane. So the high prevalence of dyslexia, the very high level of successful appeals, sendest appeals in this area, the need for early intervention, direct literacy support, the lack of evidence base. So basically, as we found in several areas, unfortunately in education, the baseline data isn't being established. So it's hard to monitor progress with this policy area. And what can be done about teacher training and other measures to make sure that the impact is made contemporaneously for impact on a child's academic career and confidence.
Okay, members content to agree those actions?
Chair, could I just add? Maybe a wee bit of a human aspect to the response, in terms of and with Kate's permission, Chair. It might be a nice gesture if the committee were to agree to write to Aidan and encourage him in his educational journey, and whatever decisions he makes in the future. If the committee were minded to do that, Chair.
Good idea, Robin. Content to support and agree that?
Sure, there will be a Hansard of this meeting, so Aidan can read that when he's finished with his mum's text messages. The listen again from today, I think, will be a nice reference point for him as well. Thank you, Robin.
Okay, members, keen to move on to the Education Authority if we can agree those actions.
Sure.
Yes, Justin, go ahead.
I'm just very worried that whilst that was a powerful session, I'm very worried that it will be standalone and won't have the impact maybe that it might have. So how can we as a committee really make an impact on this front?
I think if we can take the session from the Education Authority to see what response they give, but we always have further tools available to us, such as assembly motions, for example. We could consider an Education Committee assembly motion that the Education Minister would hopefully respond to if there are more detailed and specific issues for us to raise. That's one way of doing things. If you want to have a think about that after the EA session, yeah. Okay. Before we go to the agenda item as well, Clark, right in saying that the papers submitted by the Education Authority today had to go through the Department of Education and as such were received by the Education Committee yesterday. Is that right?
Yes, Chair. The Education Authority sent it to the department on Monday and we then received it yesterday.
Okay. I've no desire to make difficulty, but I think in that context it is appropriate for the Education Committee to communicate in a united way the need for that type of a paper to be finding its way to us with more than one working day's notice for us to consider it. Is that our members agreed? Is that reasonable? I think we need to be receiving this information and these written papers that supplement the oral briefings we're receiving with greater notice than less than 1 day to read them.
Yeah,
okay.
Great.
Okay. Thanks, members. Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove members and add our witnesses for agenda item 8, the oral briefing from the Education Authority on dyslexia services? Can I refer members to the briefing paper from the Education Authority on page 31 of tabled papers, and give a warm welcome to Una Turbot, Interim Director of Children and Young People's Services at the Education Authority, Cynthia Curry, the Assistant Director of Children and Young People's Services at the Education Authority, and Joe Healy, Head of Literacy Service at the Children and Young People's Service at the Education Authority. You're very welcome, everyone. And can I advise that we will endeavour to give you approximately 10 minutes for opening comments, followed by questions from the members. Thanks so much for being here today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for having us. Can you see us all right?
Yes, I can. Una, I can see you and hear you clearly. Yeah, thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. First of all, can I thank you for inviting us here to the Education Committee during Dyslexia Awareness Month. Before I start, I want to thank Kate for sharing Aidan's and her family's lived experience. I realise that this was not an easy thing for her to do, and I want to assure her that we are listening. I also want to thank Rachel for her acknowledgement of the efforts being made by the Literacy Service. I hope that today we will be able to provide you with some useful context, and that this session helps to increase dyslexia awareness and an awareness of the role that the Education Authority plays in addressing the challenges faced by pupils, parents and schools. At the outset, I want to say that we fully recognise and accept that pupil services are under considerable strain and not delivering as they need to be for the increasing number of children with special educational needs. Whilst progress is being made, for example in the statutory assessment and review service, and additional school places for children with special educational needs were available commencing school in September 2020 and 21, we now need to move to improve our pupil support services if we are to ensure that the barriers to learning are removed and pupils benefit from increased confidence in their own ability and the ability to achieve their goals. This includes transformation of the literacy service. No one part of our educational system is on its own and can create optimal support for those with dyslexia. The EA is firmly committed to working across its directorates with pupils, with parents, with schools, with advocacy groups and key partners. The vehicle for this much needed improvement is the Special Educational Needs and Disability Transformation Programme, being led by the Department of Education and the Education Authority. This programme involves 14 key work streams designed with the needs of pupils at the centre. A reference group made up of advocacy groups, including the Children's Law Centre and representatives from across the education sector, has been established to facilitate meaningful and continuous engagement. Engagement events have commenced and have helped inform the development of a draft outline business case that has recently been submitted to the Department of Education. This engagement will continue throughout the programme so that there is a shared sense of ownership and public confidence in the future of the special educational needs system. Our ultimate goal is that all children and young people with special educational needs or disabilities and their families are receiving the tailored and effective supports that they need to secure the best educational outcomes, delivered by a child-focused, responsive, coordinated, transparent, efficient and sustainable system. For dyslexic learners, it's of critical importance that we achieve a collective understanding of what works best for them, what constitutes early intervention and identification, how as an education system we can deliver best practice that is informed by local and international evidence. We must identify how effective dyslexia-friendly educational environments can be resourced in a sustainable manner to meet the needs of those with dyslexia and indeed other learning needs. The EA Literacy Service sits alongside a number of other pupil support services. The Literacy Service provides interventions relating to a range of literacy difficulties, including dyslexia. The term dyslexia is often used to cover a broad spectrum of literacy difficulties, including specific learning difficulties in literacy, literacy difficulties, dyslexic type difficulties, and of course, dyslexia. In terms of the Northern Ireland prevalence, studies do indicate that approximately 25% of pupils will experience some dyslexic type difficulties, and that around 10% will present difficulties that require additional supports to be provided. We recognise that dyslexia can impact on a child's learning and their life. We fully recognise that dyslexia often has social and emotional consequences, impacting on their self-esteem, their behaviours, their well-being and their mental health. The EA Literacy Service is currently supporting over 2,300 pupils through direct interventions with pupils in schools. In addition to the direct interventions, the service has worked with our C2K to provide innovative cloud-based solutions for pupils, parents and schools. For example, the Read and Write technology programme that allows the pupil to turn speech into text and text into speech. Evaluation of this programme indicates that this approach increases pupil independence, self-esteem and attainment. The programme is now widely accessible. The Literacy Service has been working hard to reduce waiting times for pupils in need of intervention using additional interim funding. Referral rates have reduced due to the impact of referrals have reduced. The number of referrals received have reduced during COVID and school closures. However, the service is anticipating a referral spike during this academic year, which will create further challenges for the service. The Literacy Service is planning to provide support for pupils waiting for direct interventions through the provision of immediate tailored advice to schools and parents and guidance relating to access to the digital technology resources. There are three main types of support provided by the Literacy Service. The first is support for all schools in creating learning environments where dyslexic pupils can be empowered to succeed. Research shows that when educational strategies are implemented in the classroom to support pupils with dyslexia, there are benefits for them and for all children. The Literacy Service provides access to resources, a training programme to support this approach, including a module specifically designed for classroom assistance. Advice is available to schools via a Literacy Service helpline and email address. The second type of support relates to literacy support for pupils, parents and schools when recommendations have been made by an educational psychologist following the assessment of an individual pupil. Literacy advice is therefore based on meeting the specific needs of that individual pupil within the classroom. Bespoke resources and follow-up training for teachers and classroom assistants are provided. Guidance is offered again on the use of effective assistive technology. The third type of support is the provision of direct intervention for an individual pupil or groups of pupils from a specialist literacy teacher. This may be provided in school or remotely. Support programmes are delivered in a 16-week block. Following each block, the EA Literacy Service teacher, school staff, the parent and pupil review outcomes and plan future interventions as appropriate to the needs of the pupil. As I stressed at the outset, we recognise that pupil support services need to change within a transformed educational system that meets the needs of all pupils with special educational needs. A key element of this will be the development of a multidisciplinary model that is available in a truly timely and effective way. I want to assure you that staff working within our pupil support services accept the need for change and are passionate, committed and dedicated to delivering against what will be an ambitious agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Una. I'll go straight to questions here, given time is short. Can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Una, Joe and Cynthia for the presentation there this morning. I'll get straight into questions as well. From your opening remarks there, you obviously watched the last briefing or saw some of it anyway, and as you said, Kate quite eloquently told the story of her son Aidan and the stresses that he has had and the challenges that they have faced as a family. So you can tell that there are serious issues around how we are supporting our children and young people with dyslexia, and we really need to improve that there. We also had an informal briefing from Dyslexia Awareness in September time, and again it was a similar kind of meeting where there was a real deep sense of frustration and desperation on behalf of the parents, that they really felt at a loss and that they were having to have a big fight just to get the simplest of support and resources for their children, knowing that as a simple kind of interventions would make a huge difference to the lives of the children. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. From what Rachel and Liam have told us as well, there are some issues around data collection. So can you tell me, do you have access to the numbers of children throughout our system who are either waiting on an assessment for dyslexia or who are dyslexic and who need support and provision from yourself?
Yeah, Nicola, just to say that data collection is a really critical point for improvement. We absolutely need to improve our data collection, and we need to understand what data do we need in order to make a difference that will inform the changes that's required. The Education Authority at the minute is actually developing a data development strategy so that we are able to to pull information in a meaningful way from across our pupil support services and indeed across all of the ES services. We do have some data in relation to dyslexia, and we can share that with you, but I do think it's important to put that in the wider context of not just relation to the literacy service, but all of the disciplines who are contributing to children, to children's special educational needs right across the system. Cynthia, do you want to say something on the data, or do you want me to pass that to Joe?
No, I'd just say that the data isn't as informative as we'd want it to be at this present time, and that's not the data on an individual child basis when they're baselined and then their outcomes. It's not that the data has not been collected at that stage, but we need a better way of being able to analyse trends and to be able to modernise our systems that collect the data. So it is difficult to pinpoint exactly from our current systems the number of children that have dyslexia, because our evidence gathering base is wider. It's dyslexia and specific learning difficulties, so it is difficult. But what we can say is that currently children who have a statement which names dyslexia as their first primary need, there are 766 children in Northern Ireland who have a statement that says primary need, and then we have 855 children where dyslexia is named as an additional need. So that's 1,621 with dyslexia named on their statement of need. We also know from the department and from the school, Northern Ireland School Census data, that we have approximately over 9,300 children who have been listed as dyslexia or specific literacy difficulties in the 2021 year. But absolutely, data is critical, as Ina said, to improvement, and we do need to be able to capture that more effectively. We have been working on the waiting list within the literacy service. So I think currently, and Joe can correct me, I think it's 192 children are currently waiting and on the waiting list for the direct intervention support that was talked about. It's still 192 children that are waiting, but it's certainly an improving picture for the literacy service, but we're not resting on our laurels because we still do not know the impact of COVID.
Yeah, there's likely going to be a spike, as was outlined there in your presentation. Listen, Cynthia, I appreciate those facts and figures there, but I suppose the point I was making is the one you and Una both touched upon, that we need greater data collection so that we actually know what trends are out there and how to improve on the services. So I'm glad that you've admitted that it's not up to scratch and that work needs to be done, and I hope that their development strategy actually works and that the right efforts put in, because we need to have data there to make a real proper positive changes. The other point I wanted to touch upon was one that Rachel had made in her presentation, which I never got asking her about, but it was about children in the Irish medium education sector who have dyslexia, or maybe not even identified yet, because she said there was two issues. One, that there was a wait and see approach until maybe they were in P4, which was going to be too late, according to Rachel, for proper early intervention and proper services. And the other was that the resources were not suitable for Irish-speaking children. So can you tell me what the Education Authority are doing to address this here issue, please?
Okay, Nicola, thank you for that question. I'll take that one. We're working with CNG. We've shared some information with them. And again, this is in relation to data, because we are conscious that children in an Irish medium have particular needs, and we have a duty to promote their access to Irish medium schools. We have 251 children, and of those that have been involved in our transfer process this year, and of those 239 have remained within Irish medium settings. 6 of them have moved to mainstream. 1 of them has moved to a special school, and 5 of them have moved to the specialist provisions that we have set up. We are very conscious that we need to meet their needs in particular, and there is work underway to develop our resources to translate them for parents and children into Irish medium. So we're working with CNG on that.
And just in relation to the literacy service on that one, So the Literacy Service sits on the cross-directorate working group with the Irish medium sector, and a senior member of our team now who's an Irish speaker has come on board and is involved in that. And we'll work closely within that forum, looking at what can be best practice here, and also looking at in terms of what is happening in relation to SEND provision, dyslexia, and Irish medium down south as well. So there's work to do going forward in all those areas.
All right, for me, thank you for that, Joe. Listen, I appreciate that you are doing the work and to make positive steps, and I do welcome that, of course. But it is frustrating to hear that children have had to leave the Irish medium sector to go to other schools because the help and support isn't there, and that's not fair. But I do appreciate that you're putting the effort in now to give the Irish medium sector the proper support and resources. But it is frustrating for them. Chair, I know you're trying to move me on here, but I've got one quick question, and that's just about private assessments for dyslexia. Will the Education Authority accept private assessments or diagnosis of dyslexia?
Do you want to take that?
I can take that one, yeah. Under the current model of provision and the interconnectedness between the Educational Psychology Service and the Literacy Service, all referrals come to the Literacy Service from our colleagues in the EA Educational Psychology Service. But it's my understanding that if a private assessment comes to the attention of the school and it brings it to the attention of our Educational Psychology Service through the regular consultation process that our Psychology Service has with schools, that the details and the content of that report can be discussed and form part of the conversation in relation to consideration for a referral to the Literacy Service. So that's where private reports, in terms of my understanding, sit within the process here.
Yeah, right. I think it's important that our educational psychologists are required to carry out an assessment where that is deemed to be appropriate. And yes, they will absolutely take into consideration any evidence that is presented by parents. So that could be a private psychology assessment, and it could be a private assessment in relation to dyslexia or any other private assessment. But we do require educational psychologists to carry out their own independent assessment.
All right, so they will work with families and their maybe private assessments, but it's ultimately up to the Education Authority and their own assessment. Okay. Listen, thanks so much. Thanks to the three of you, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. Robin Newton, MLA, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Una, to Cynthia, and to Joe for being with us today. I'd just like to continue, maybe, Chair, the collection of data. I'm pleased at that because the Children's Law Society were placing a great deal of emphasis on that for the future. Can I maybe just ask three, I think, fairly short questions, Chair? In terms of the qualified persons, the teachers in school, or those teachers who do take up a module on continuing professional development, do we know how many teachers do that module? And do we know the level of peripatetic support that we have, and can we quantify that for the members of the committee? In terms of the connection, and I know the committee has seen many examples and has argued for many examples where there needs to be a joined up approach between departments, and particularly over the pandemic matters. But is there a connection between health and education at an early stage on the matter of dyslexia? And then it's a question I did pose to the previous evidence givers. Is there a school that has an ethos that would stand out maybe as an example of how they have addressed this issue of dyslexia? Just three questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Robin. I think could we start with the school ethos? Maybe ask Cynthia to take that one.
I think yes, the school ethos and teacher professional learning that you have mentioned. I think this is it's a very critical conversation that we need to have, and it's getting the balance between already overloaded schools, particularly at present, and practitioners in the classroom being able to, I suppose, deal with all of the challenges that schools have presently, but also being able to equip our professionals within the classroom that when they are faced with children with particular needs, that they can deal with those needs. And this is absolutely critical in terms of early identification and supporting staff in schools to be able to carry out that early identification, and then also to support them with their wider literacy needs, not just at early intervention, but you're absolutely right, at that early stage. It's the stage that we want to make the most impact. And I suppose in settings and schools, because early year settings also receive support, we have different ways of acknowledging and identifying that. So it's not just, I suppose, the literacy service, but also it's the types of behaviours that children may demonstrate that may be from frustration of aspects of their language development, for example, that can be picked up by early year settings and by our language communication service. And indeed, just rolling into your other point at that stage of the links with health, that service linked very closely with speech therapy, and our educational psychologists would tell us that, you know, children who experience difficulties at that early stage with language development often go on to then require dyslexia support at a later stage. So it's actually equipping our professionals to identify the signs, not just of dyslexia, but dyslexia behaviours or how they may manifest themselves within the school. And I think while peripatetic support is really, really valuable, and we've shown that time and time again, and we absolutely need to have it there, we do need to really have this conversation about professional learning and how we support it further. And I suppose while we in Children and Young People's Services will do that on a child-focused basis, obviously our colleagues in the School Development Service also do that through their wider strategies and programmes. And in terms of schools that may have an aptitude for this, there absolutely are schools who have an aptitude for it. And one of the strategies that our School Development Service use is the gathering of case studies to inform other aspects of practice. So to point to one school, I think would be both unfair. There certainly are a few in my mind at the moment that I think if we were to gather case studies we could go to, but to point to those schools I think would be unfair in this morning's session. But be assured there's excellent practice going across many of our schools, and we do need to disseminate that more carefully. So I suppose professional learning in its widest sense is partly training sessions and how many people turn up at training sessions, but it's also that peer dissemination and that ongoing professional development right through from teacher training college right through a professional's life. So very passionate about this, as you can know. Professional learning and support for practitioners in the classroom is critical in any debate around dyslexia.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. I just mentioned the joined up approach, Robin, that you've mentioned, absolutely critical. We can't do this alone. And we do need to work in a collaborative way, and as Rachel refers to, we have a duty to cooperate. We have a SEND steering group, which is about implementation of the new framework, and that's jointly chaired by officials in the Department of Education and Department of Health. We also have working groups, and we've had workshops that have involved the Public Health Agency and our Health and Social Care Trust colleagues in order to establish those relationships or develop those relationships and make sure that what we are doing actually makes sense from both perspectives. I think it's absolutely critical that we do that. I think the other thing to say is that in terms of our resource, we have a finite resource, and that is we need to make sure that we're maximising the benefit and the effectiveness of that resource. And that is why collaboration is actually so important. But I am going to ask Jo just to quantify the number of literacy teachers, specialist teachers that are employed by the EA in a service.
Yeah, thanks, Ina. Thank you, Robin. Just in relation to the continuing professional development of teachers and teacher professional learning, if I could just signpost members, committee members to pages 8, 9 and 10 of the briefing note that we provided you with for this morning's session. And it kind of gives you, albeit brief, outline in terms of what has gone into the school's estate in terms of building capacity in the area of literacy difficulties and dyslexia over the last 15 to 19 years. One of the challenges for us in terms of helping the schools and building their own capacity in supporting dyslexic type learners is that there is an awful lot out there, and I suppose maybe we need more cohesion in terms of bringing that all together, bringing that up to date. So at the moment, my colleagues in the Literacy Service, we have for this academic year 17 modules focusing on different aspects of dyslexia, SPLDs and literacy that are targeted at the whole breadth of the school community. It's targeted at supporting schools and supporting parents, supporting classroom assistants, and supporting teachers. The field of dyslexia and the breadth of the topic is very broad, and it's very comprehensive, and it's very cross-cutting with other special educational needs as well, especially in the area of speech, language and communication. So there's a direct line between the training that the Language and Communication Service provides and the training that the Literacy Service provides. And our training is constructed in such a way that school leaders can look at it as a menu, and they can look at their own audit and staffing needs, capacity building audit in school, and they can choose down or draw down from our menu what they feel would fit best within their whole school needs and whole school development planning process. So in terms of school improvement strategy and the wider kind of strategic development and capacity building of schools, it fits within that broader picture. That's the here and now. In terms of the first part of your question, Robin, it was in relation to how many teachers are there out there who've accessed modules or training that has been maybe more focused on specialist skills development. So the 3.4 million was put into the SEN CPD literacy development project run jointly between Stranmillis College and St Mary's University about 5 to 6 years ago, over about a 2 to 3 year period. And through that project, there are now approximately 350 teachers out there across the school estate in schools now who retain teacher status with the British Dyslexia Association or associate membership status with the British Dyslexia Association. Some of those staff, through that funded project, have taken things further, and they've gone on and done master's degree qualifications in literacy difficulties as a follow-on from that project. But that project was quite far-reaching in terms of its offer to the primary school sector. So every primary school in Northern Ireland was offered the opportunity to have 2 members of staff take part in the training. One to the kind of the M level modules that you might be referring to, Robin, and then another member of staff to be there in terms of peer support and team, working as a team with that teacher in terms of the dissemination of the training and good practice back in schools. But altogether, at the end of that project, as well as those more kind of deeply trained teachers with those qualifications, I think approximately 5,140 teachers in our primary schools were trained through that capacity building programme. And it was very extensive. And I should add that it was very, very positively evaluated by ETI as well at the post-evaluation review stage. And Robin, very briefly, the last thing I'll say is that just in terms of the last couple of pages in the briefing paper, there's a range of linked initiatives, programs, training initiatives, linking in with stuff that's gone on across the border in terms of best practice in literacy, and that has kind of knitted together. And I think in terms of our current CPD offer for schools, we have tried to amalgamate everything that has gone on here and absorb the international research as well, and put it into that universal approach offer for all schools, primary and post-primary in the country.
Okay, thanks, Joe. We're really short on time. Robin, if you could...
Just very quickly, Joe, the programme you've referred to, the 350 trained teachers, that programme has now concluded?
Yeah, the funded element of that programme has concluded, but I think it's fair to say, Robin, that the learning, the evidence-based approaches and research has, through the literacy service, followed on into the EA schools-based training, because a good percentage of my staff and my senior staff were actually involved in the project as lecturers, tutors, and actually continue on to be as well in the current postgraduate programme in Stranraer in relation to literacy difficulties. So the programme came to an end, but the professional learning and the development, one of the nice things about that project is that it has perpetuated and it has continued to percolate through the support that's available to schools.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you to the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Justin McNulty, MLA, please.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Erin, Cynthia, Joe. Thank you for your evidence. One point that Rachel Hogan made from the Children's Law Centre earlier that struck me, and it was very, very important point. Has the EA spoken to children?
Yes, we are. As part of the SEND transformation team, the youth service is facilitating the engagement with children, absolutely critical and important. And I think we all have to listen to children. I think there's an assumption that we as adults know what children want and we know what they need. A lot of our children don't necessarily want a classroom assistant following them around in post-primary. They don't necessarily want to be taken out of their class. They do want support in the way that they want it. So you're absolutely right. We have to listen to our children, and we have to provide them with the support where and how they want it. And that might mean after school, or it might be in other ways. So absolutely right. So we're using our youth service to facilitate that, and they're experienced and well able to do it. So we're looking forward to the feedback that we're getting from young people. And I would open the door to any young person who wants to come and meet with ourselves, who have lived experiences. We as I said in our opening remarks, we are listening, and we want to listen, because that's the only way we're going to get this right.
That's reassuring to hear. Thank you for that, Una. Secondary schools have been resourced to a degree to address special education needs in-house through their remedial departments, but primary schools have no such facility. Does this not fly in the face of the whole idea around early intervention and the importance of early intervention?
It's a good question, Cynthia. I don't know what you want to say about coming from there.
No, I think it's post-primary would be my background also, and I suppose what I would say is, if you were to ask many post-primary teachers, they would probably think they aren't as well equipped with some of these issues as they would want to be also. So I do absolutely agree with you. As I said in the first answer, early intervention is absolutely key. It is the classroom teacher or the early year setting classroom assistant, or whomever it is that is working alongside children. They are the people that will identify children at a very early stage. As I said earlier, we need to get better at supporting those people to be early identification, early support, and to be able to put in place those basic strategies, which for many children will actually work. But then it lets us get to the crux of the matter of those children that absolutely need that more intense support going forward. So totally couldn't agree more. Resource is our key issue. We need resource to do so.
Yeah, I suppose when listening to the previous session as well, when you hear a reference to 37 children in a class, that is alarming. And we need to make sure that our classes are well equipped to create what we have referred to as dyslexic friendly classrooms, and also making sure that they are equipped to deal with other learning needs. Also, given that we know, for example, ADHD has a high prevalence. We know that there are children who with autism. So the classroom is a complex place for teachers to provide the good learning experiences for all children, and it is important that they're resourced to do that.
There are 37 children in my class, my primary school class, and I'm one of the survivors, I would suggest. 100% of Children's Law Centre appeals have been successful. Dyslexia, in terms of the numbers, the data, there's a view from the Children's Law Centre that the reason that there is no data is because the Education Authority recognises that it doesn't have the resource to help the children who need support. And that's why there is a reluctance to provide that data. And in terms of the data, you touched on the data, Cynthia. You mentioned the numbers of 5,400 teachers trained and approved. No, I think Joe mentioned that number. Sorry, you mentioned the figure of 1,100 children who have been identified with dyslexia, 192 children waiting on direct interactive support, 1,600 named as having dyslexia as part of their need. That's a small fraction compared to the 1 in 10 figure, which Danny reckons is the figure for children, the number of children who have dyslexia. That's a tip of the iceberg. Are you worried that there is the data that you have is very, very short of what is the actual truth of the matter?
Absolutely. The data is not where we need it to be, and I think we're all clear on that. But what I would say is there is absolutely no intent on our part to use data or to not to develop a data set in order to not provide services. We want to be open and transparent. I think we've said that previously at these committees. This is about being openness and transparent. We are putting everything on the table here. We will be developing our data sets, and that will be shared in a public manner.
Can I just add to that? Do you mind if I just add to that also? I mean, I think one of the issues here that we're touching on is unmet need, and we need to get where we on that particular issue. So we are about to begin a project with psychology, working with schools through a consultation, really in-depth consultation with a sample of schools to look at what unmet need there may be across a section of schools, and we do hope to get a report on that to help us move in a particular direction with unmet need. I think one of the other aspects about resource and the number of children, there has been much mention of the provisional criteria, and I think we would all agree that the provisional criteria was put together a number of years ago, I think 2009, potentially in a different context. It was about giving equality of resource, and I do absolutely believe through the SEND Strategic Development Programme that we will look at that provisional criteria again to look at is this the best way for identifying children. I suppose we await the SEND Act and making sure that whatever we do will be in tune with the SEND Act. And we also have siloed services at the moment. So we need to make sure that we're not just trying to fix, if you like, one service and one need, but that our support services are reviewed in a multidisciplinary way, because they will interact and they will link in identifying that need in different ways and also dealing with it.
Okay, thanks. Listen, I muddled my figures there earlier, so apologies for any confusion created. In terms of that comment around Rachel Hogan, who said that 100% of Children's Law Centre's appeals have been successful, and hearing the story from Kate McKeown about Aidan, as I made it akin to climbing Mount Everest in a storm, the experience of that family. Why should that be? Why is that the case? I have a similar case in my own office where a mother is fighting for the support that her daughter deserves, and all of these kids come through our offices. Why should that be that parents have to fight for the support they need?
Yeah, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. We don't want parents fighting for what their children's needs. And I think we've said before at this committee, we want to take the fight out of this, and the fight at all levels, including the fact that parents feel that they have to go through. We are looking at the whole issue of tribunals and the number of tribunals and the number of tribunals that we've conceded, on the steps and all of that. So there's a comprehensive piece of work going on. We're actually going in to look at some specific individual cases. We're working with our legal team to try and help make sure that we actually get a thorough understanding of what's going on and why this is happening, and come up with recommendations and suggestions as to how we can deal with that. I would expect that report to be available at the end of November, early December, and that report again will be shared with yourselves, and hopefully we'll all learn from it.
Okay, thank you. Chair, one more question. And listen, I don't doubt for a second your authenticity, guys, and your determination to make an impact here. So one final question, if you bear with me. We're just following up from what Nicola had touched on earlier. In a study carried out in 2017 on dyslexia assessment for pupils in Irish medium education, the research found that the current practice of identifying dyslexia in Irish medium populations is not optimal for immersion pupils and completely inaccurate for pupils who are native Irish speakers. How can we assure assessments are fit for purpose going forward for pupils in the Irish medium sector?
Yeah. Well, I know our educational psychologists have been working to look at this particular area. I haven't got the information on that today, but absolutely, I just can assure you that the psychology service have been on the back of that and working alongside Sina G and others have been looking at assessments and how we currently assess, and indeed looking and reviewing at the appropriateness of our assessments. So there has been a piece of work. There is a piece of work going on within psychology, but I don't have any more information on that. We can.
No, I know there is some. The education psychologists tell us that they need to carry out assessments for most effect in the child's first language, and where we have a child who is native Irish speaker, who the first language is Irish, we do have an educational psychologist who will carry out that assessment regardless of where the child lives.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, folks. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Robbie Butler, MLA, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, team. You'll be safe looking at my face because my camera's on the blink here. Okay, so listen, my first question, I hope you don't mind me asking this, but we got a table pack last night. It came in quite late, and I think the reason was some of the information didn't come to the committee until late. Can I ask you, do you guys have to send all of your information to the department to be checked before it is looked at, before it's sent?
No, first of all, I would apologise for the delay in that. I think there may have been some delay in actually EA ourselves being invited or being informed that we were actually appearing in today. So that we obviously needed some time to put that paper together, and that has probably contributed to the delay.
I appreciate that.
We don't get approval now. If you're asking me, do we send our submissions through for approval from DE? No, this is our submission, and we stand over it and we sign it and take accountability for it.
Grant, I appreciate that. That is the important one. To be honest, the piece about, listen, if you're waiting on timely information from me, sometimes I'm the world's worst procrastinator. I'm not the best. So in terms of I totally get if it comes late. I get that. Just interested to see whether it has to go through a vetting process with the department or not. But I appreciate if it's signed off, then it's yours. I appreciate that. Can I go back into the provisional criteria that was talked about just about 5 or 10 minutes ago? The provisional criteria obviously is out of date. If it's still being used, is it not a weakness to any defence or any, if the EA, for instance, are in a dispute with a parent, is it not, or is it maybe not being used?
Well, it still is there because I suppose in many ways we don't have a viable alternative at the moment. But what we have been doing in practice is trying to look at the implementation of that provisional criteria child by child, and potentially not being as rigid in our delivery and our use of the provisional criteria. That being said, we absolutely need some type of framework. We unfortunately do not have an infinite pot of money, and so we do need some type of framework, and we don't have another at this time. We would, as I mentioned earlier, we absolutely need another framework. It's one of our first priorities in working through the SEND Strategic Development Programme, because that provisional criteria has an impact at Stage 3 and Stage 5 services.
Okay, thank you. And forgive me if I missed this. I had to take a call when some of the other questions were being asked. Children's Law Centre had stated that they reckon there's 35,000 dyslexic children in Northern Ireland. Did someone ask that? And is it something that you guys would estimate to be an accurate figure or not?
We're going to pass this one to Joe.
I suppose we're back to prevalence rates again, and any English-speaking jurisdiction that is addressing kind of dyslexia at a national level, the first big challenge is the issue of prevalence rates. In terms of the data and the figures for Northern Ireland, the most recent figures that we have would indicate that of a primary 3 age group sample of children who were with whom this issue was explored, we had between 24 in the first study and 27% of children presented with a type or a degree of dyslexic type indicator. So as you know yourself, that's over a quarter of the school-based population of 335,000 children and young people. So the figure of 1 in 10 is a widely circulated figure in terms of children who may have a level of need, which may require a level of intervention, support, higher level differentiation, and a carefully structured, cumulative, multisensory phonics program that's evidence-based. So that's the 1 in 10. That is the 10%. And like with all of our SENs, that quarter of the school-based population, there is a continuum of need. But even within that continuum of need, it's not a sliding scale where every child at each degree of the scale is the same. Dyslexia is a very complex issue. It has multiple causes, and its remediation requires multiple strategies. And if one strategy isn't working, you try another. So that's partly why maybe the data on exactly how many children have a diagnosis of dyslexia isn't immediately available. It's because it is a complex field, and the statistics within it are complex. But I'm sure the finer detail will be explored within the context of the review of the literacy service, within the context of all other related services.
Okay, thank you. With regard to educational psychology, I know this is probably in the wider look at the special education needs and the review and the reform and the transformation. You guys have been incredibly busy and have been doing excellent work, but I've raised this before, that dealing with some historical difficulties and then here and now and the future, what does the burden look like for educational psychology, and is that being factored into future-proofing the process of identifying those children who have the need?
Absolutely. We need to look very carefully at the educational psychologist role. They are experts, and they do provide us with advice in relation to the needs of children with special educational needs and the provision that is most appropriate to them. So we're absolutely dependent on them. What we need to do is to make sure that we are maximising their input where it is most needed, and that is something that we're looking at now. We have a couple of problems. We have a problem in that we don't have educational psychologists for recruitment. They're not out there. So there is a scarcity of educational psychologists. So we are currently exploring ways as to how we can support them. And that might involve the introduction of a psychology assistant who would be a qualified psychologist, someone with a psychology degree who's not an educational psychologist, but will have sufficient knowledge and experience and support from an educational psychologist to try and to create a skill mix within that team. So that's something that we are currently exploring as an interim measure. We will have to look at the role of the educational psychologist in relation to what has been referred to as gatekeeping, how they interact with others, and how we take their role and make sure that they are providing all of the services with support in order to maximise the impact of all services. One of the things that we're doing at the minute, and it's related to the additional provisions that were set up this year and last year, is we have introduced a multidisciplinary team. The psychologists, educational psychologists are part of that, as are representatives from our autism service, our literacy service, our behaviour support service, early years services, all of those services. And they're actually coming together to look at the profile of children within those settings, and to look also at the needs of the classroom staff, the teachers and the classroom assistants, and coming up with a plan, a multidisciplinary plan that will support the provisions to create effective, safe, secure, nurturing environments where children can learn. And I think there'll be a lot of learning coming from that. So we're looking forward to the evaluation of that piece of work, and that will inform how we move forward with the role of education psychologists. I have no doubt.
Yeah, I appreciate the work you have to do in the interim. Why are there no educational psychologists coming through? You know?
I think one of the reasons is that we haven't trained enough of them. we reduced the number of students that were on the training programme. It takes them 3 years to come through. They are primarily a female workforce, and I'm not sure what impact that has, but I've no doubt it's some. So I think there's a combination of factors that have resulted in a situation where we can't recruit. And I think we're not on our own in this. The recruitment, we did go across the water to try to recruit, but we know that there are similar issues across the water as well.
Okay. So maybe I'll maybe have a discussion maybe with the College of Psychology or something just in this, because I think it's something that we need to be addressing now. And speaking into it. It's a very, very worthy job. It's an excellent role, and maybe I'm sure you're looking at it, but Chair, I'm happy enough with that now. But something I'm very, very interested in.
Yeah,
thanks, Robbie.
It's something we are working with the department on in terms of increasing the cohort of student education psychologists over the next 3 years.
Brilliant. Thank you, Una.
Thanks. Can I bring in Diane Dodds, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you guys for the presentation so far. I did nip out to take a call, so if I am asking something that's been asked, I do apologise. I would really quite like to interrogate the figures so far, because one of the things that the Children's Law Society indicated to us is that there is a vast number of young people and children who have dyslexia but whose needs are not formally identified. And you indicate that there are about 1,600 children who have statements with either dyslexia as a primary reason for the statement or named on the statement as a contributing issue. But that 9,300 children may have dyslexia or indeed literacy difficulties.
Yeah, how is that, Corey? Just to explain that not every child with dyslexia will require a statement of special educational needs.
No, I'm coming on to that, Una, because that's a very important point that you've just made. Not every child with dyslexia will require a statement of educational needs, but many parents go for a statement because they can't get the help at the earlier stages where they actually need it within the system. So stage 1 to 3. So what are you doing to actually help those children? Because it seems to me that we've talked a lot today. There's a lot of stuff that is a work in progress, but I really want to try to get down to the kind of figures and what we're doing.
I think Cynthia maybe touched on the issue of unmet need. We don't know the number of children who haven't been brought to the Education Authority. We know they're there, and we know that that we have a limited educational psychology resource, and we have a time allocation model in relation to that. Now, the PAC, which was referred to earlier, I think in your earlier session, the PAC recommendations, has asked for a review of all pupil support services. That will be an independent review, which we are looking forward to. We actually welcome that, and we will fully engage with that review, because there's no doubt, I suppose, in any of our minds that there are children out there in schools who we are not connected to. We do support them through, I think, some of the provision, the supports that have been referred to through the capacity building with teachers and out there, but there are limits to what are the number of children that are coming into the EA. So we don't know. The fact is, we don't know the detail of that, and it's something that we need to work through.
And that is really quite a statement, that we actually don't know how many children who have unmet need in relation to dyslexia, and that's only one element of the children that you will deal with who have wider educational need. It really is quite a statement, and would be something that I think maybe the committee should return to. It's really quite startling. I suppose the other element that I want to say to you, that you tell me that there are 192 children, and we now know that you know of which should be the qualification, who are waiting for direct intervention from the literacy support unit, but who haven't yet got it. Am I right with that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So what are those children's waiting times? So what do they range from? 6 months, 2 months, 1 year? What's the longest and shortest waiting time that those children are waiting?
We'll pass this one to Joe.
Okay, so as you've seen from the paper there, we're currently supporting approximately 3,400 odd children at the moment through direct intervention, and then and then at the tail end of that referral list from educational psychology will be the 192 children who have not yet got picked up for direct intervention, put simply. And so those children, about half of those children would have been referred to the literacy service between the 1st of September and yesterday. And the other half of those children would have been referred between around about mid-April up to the end of August. So that's the time frame that 192 children are waiting. So the longest waiting of those children would have been referred to the literacy service to April, May of last academic year. So in response to our wait lists, we've been trying to develop ourselves within the capacity that we have to be as responsive as we can to referrals. So we've put together and recruited to an internal team which is dedicated solely to referred children who we don't immediately have the capacity to pick up for direct intervention, i.e. teaching. And so at the end of this month, that team will be operationalised and will be contacting parents, contacting schools and providing remote virtual learning environment support to schools, support to teachers, and in terms of advice and guidance, the provision of digital resourcing, and then also on the C2K system, we're building a virtual learning environment for the class teacher to access resources, and we would signpost the teacher to those resources. So that's just to give you a context in terms of those 192 children who are waiting and what's happening for them between now and they get picked up for direct intervention. So in terms of then the time frame that they would receive teaching, the latest that those children will receive teaching would be February of 22.
So these children have been referred for literacy intervention. The age group of these children?
The majority will be primary. I don't have the exact detail of the 192 children here in front of me, but the majority of those referrals will be primary school referrals.
So at a really crucial time in their development, these children could wait the most of a year, some of them, for literacy intervention.
Yeah, so the minority of them will be waiting the longest length of time. You're talking about a timeline of children coming to the service. So
I appreciate that, Joe. I'm not being difficult. This is something very close to my heart. As I explained in the previous session, many years ago when I was a teacher, I did actually teach children in small groups who had literacy difficulties. This is something that is absolutely close to my heart. And something that, I think with the Fair Start report and with a number of things that really, if we are to improve children's chances, we have to intervene quickly and early. And if a child who is 7, for example, is waiting a year to get that intervention, you can see then why parents automatically jump to the statutory stages of intervention because they're not getting the intervention at the earlier, quicker time. Now, that intervention can be a range of things. I understand that. So it can be interventions in the school with good support for teachers and up-to-date resources and so on for teachers. And many children will benefit from that and will not need any more intervention. But some children will progressively need more and more intervention. I have another question, Chair, but can I just ask, why is the support service virtual? and not face-to-face with children?
Because we have to manage our resources to best effect insofar as we can. We had a pot of resourcing there that we could dedicate towards this work. We'll review it as the year progresses in terms of it needs additionality to respond in relation to those children who are waiting. But our teachers, as you know, Diane, direct teaching intervention is an expensive resource, and at the moment we have a team of just under 160 teachers travelling around the country providing one-to-one direct intervention. To maximise the deployment of those staff have to be fully timetabled to maximise our contact with children and to maximise the impact that the interventions are going to take. So, as I think was alluded to earlier, our year is divided into half, almost in a semesterised system. And so the teachers are timetabled for 16 weeks, and then the progress is reevaluated, and then the next part of the timetable rolls for another 16 weeks. So in terms of direct intervention, because of the nature of the resource and the nature of the model of service delivery and the build of the service, it's extremely hard to be immediately responsive in terms of providing direct intervention. So
I
across you briefly. That's
can I just ask this last question?
Final question, thanks.
Right. So one comment, I mean, it does seem to me that children who have literacy difficulties will not benefit most if they don't have face-to-face teaching. But two, how many children are waiting on the production of a statement, and how many children are waiting in Northern Ireland on an evaluation from an educational psychologist?
Well, maybe we take that separately in relation to the statement process. We have made progress in relation to our compliance with the 26-week statutory time frame. So at the end of March, we were fully compliant. We were 100% compliant. Now, just to say that in June, we received a very significant surge in the number of referrals requests for a decision, really, in relation to the statement process. It virtually doubled. So that has caused us quite a challenge. And we're not 100% compliant, but we are definitely a lot better than we were a couple of years ago. I think if I recall, I don't have the figure in front of me, but we have something like under 40 children would be beyond the 26-week compliance with who don't have a valid exception in relation to that assessment. But we have put additional resource in. We're recognising it. We know every one of those children. They are monitored by the head of service and by Cynthia herself as the assistant director, and we have put additional resource in to deal with that surge, and I would expect that figure will come down again next month or the month thereafter.
I think maybe the question, number of open cases is at the 31st of August, which is our last validated data set. The open cases going through the stage 4 waiting was 2,195 children going through that process.
Okay.
Chris, if I could just clarify one point, which I think may have been, apologies, I'm not sure if it was misunderstood, but just in terms of your question, your point about virtual teaching, or why is the teaching virtual? We don't do virtual teaching unless it is requested by the school or the parent, or it's because of COVID-related issues. What I'm talking about there in terms of the true virtual environment is the advice and guidance to the school.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Diane. If I could bring in Harry Harvey, MLA. Harry, if you're brief enough, you might give me a chance to ask a question as well. Thanks.
You can be sure I'll do that, Chair, and thank you very much. And thank you, Eunice, Cynthia, and Joe. Maybe you could just tell me then, what are the characteristics of a dyslexia-friendly school, please?
Okay, I'm going to pass that to Joe.
Yeah.
You want to take it, Cynthia?
Yeah, no, it's in terms of what's available to schools to map their way through that, DE and EGI have produced the dyslexia friendly learning environment guidance document for schools, and that takes schools right through the development of a dyslexia friendly learning environment from ages 3 to 4 and right up through the system. So and that's still a very solid and very well grounded document. So and it also takes schools through developing their dyslexia policy, which would sit alongside their broader whole curriculum literacy policy. And so it would be recommended as good practice that schools have developed their own dyslexia policy. Some schools will also have gone down the road of linking with the British Dyslexia Association and achieving quality kite mark status with the British Dyslexia Association. But it is a school whereby dyslexia awareness is throughout the entire is raised to the highest level that it can be across the entire school community in terms of what's visually available throughout the school, in terms of the teaching and learning and professional development of staff, in terms of curriculum delivery, in terms of school development planning. Because it is the highest incidence of our SENS, it would be good practice that all schools are cognizant of building a dyslexia-friendly learning environment across all phases of the education system. I've just cited one document there, but there's a broader range of guidance available to schools there too.
Yeah, appreciate that. And could you just maybe tell me, are EA acting on the recent recommendations by the Public Accounts Committee, the PAC? I'm sure you've seen the recent recommendations from the PAC.
Absolutely, they've been taken very seriously, and we're working closely with the Department of Education on all of those recommendations. We look forward to those recommendations being implemented, particularly in relation to those first and second recommendations in relation to the review of our pupil support services, and the independent review, and we look forward to the recommendations that will provide us and help us to take this work forward.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for your answers on this, Cynthia. And go ahead, Chair. That's grand. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. Good questions. Thanks for those. I'll try and be as concise as I can here. How far under capacity is the EA Pupil Support Service?
How long is a piece of string? Maybe a question when we don't know what exactly it is that we're going to be doing, what the model needs to look at moving forward. I think now, yes, we are under strain. We don't have enough, enough staff to meet need, and hence we have waiting lists, and we are trying to maximise the resource. But it's not just about throwing more of the same. At the service, in the same way as we looked at the SARS service, the statement and assessment service, we actually had to take time to understand what it is that the service should look like. Where do we need to put in that additional resource in order to make a difference? So we are in a much better place in terms of that the statementing process, and that team that are responsible for that. We know what we need there. We need to go through now the same process with all of these other services to make sure that we are maximising the public resource that has been put into these services, and that will allow us then to determine what does the model look like, and then what skills, knowledge, competencies do we require in order to achieve excellence, and that will then inform what it is, the additional resource that we require moving forward. Just to say that the transformation programme, when approved, and hopefully that will be in the near future, certainly from our perspective, has a time frame of 18 months. So we're working through that.
Okay, and in what way is the EA Pupil Support Service under capacity, given that you've acknowledged it's failing to meet the needs of pupils with special educational needs?
Most of our resources are people, they're staff. That's really the bulk of what make our most of our costs and most of our resource are within our own team. Now we have actually, and I think the literacy service is a very good example of that, where there has been work done in relation to technology development and supporting children and empowering children through technology. So that again is something that we need to do more of across all of our services.
Okay. What is wrong with the provisional criteria for dyslexia support?
Cynthia, do you want to take that one?
I think just basically it is outdated, and it is fairly rigid, and potentially the criteria is narrow, and we need to be, as we've talked a lot about unmet need, we need to try to reach out to as many children as possible, but also in the same way to ensure that the children who require services most are getting that. So I think it needs a revamp. Joe might want to say more in relation to dyslexia, but just in general, it is a fairly rigid criteria that that I suppose isn't conducive to supporting the type of open support services that we want.
Why has the provisional criteria for dyslexia support been allowed to become outdated and rigid?
Well, I think the removing the criteria or changing the criteria is something that would have a systems-wide impact. And I'm talking about here in relation to literacy difficulties, possibly other SENDs as well, but that wouldn't be my area. But the provisional criteria as it currently stands, I think when we would carry out a literature review in terms of a review of the literacy service, we will need to evaluate where the provisional criteria sits in terms of what is the evidence base in terms of the identification of literacy difficulties and the different parameters within the provisional criteria. The literacy service would openly welcome a review of the criteria. Some of the impacts of it were touched on by Liam and Rachel and by Kate earlier. And so it has been, I think, something that has been it has such a significant impact that to tackle it on its own in isolation from reviewing services in parallel would be probably too complicated a task to undertake.
Okay, who sets the provisional criteria?
The criteria, as I understand it, was developed by the previous education and library boards. Now, there's no doubt it needs to be reviewed. We need to look at it. We want to look at it. I think for me, the balance, it's not facilitating the balance that we need between making sure the children have access to earlier interventions and responding to those children who are most in need of very specialist support. So it's part of the work that needs to happen, and I have no doubt it will significantly change over the next year or so.
Okay, and so who is responsible for the provisional criteria becoming outdated and rigid? Well,
we are responsible. I am now responsible for it, and what I am assuring you and the committee is that we understand it. We understand it as a barrier, and we are addressing it. So I am now responsible for moving this forward.
I'm encouraged by that, Una. I'd be interested. I'm genuinely interested to know how we got to this place, given that the provisional criteria seems to be so critical to the access of support. But I'll move on beyond that for now. Maybe the review program itself will look at that. Okay, so you acknowledge that there is a need for review. You've said that the literary service review will be part of a wider multidisciplinary review under the integrated multidisciplinary model of pupil support with a 2-year timeframe to August 2023. The Children's Law Centre and the Parent Advocate were very clear that review should be independent and rapid. The current review format does not seem to me to be independent or rapid. Would you care to respond to that?
I suppose they were coming at this in a number of different angles. There will be an independent review carried out. DE are commissioning that, and that will provide us with information that is absolutely independent in relation to our services. Are they fit for purpose? What's working well? What's not working so well? What do we need to change? And we're looking forward to that. The SEND Strategic Development Programme is a programme that will be informed by that, and we are opening our doors. We are working through the reference group. Rachel herself is involved in that reference group. Parents advocacy groups are welcome to contribute to that. Anything that is being taken forward, any of the proposals, the change is all being taken through that in a very open way. And I think, as I said, Chris, earlier, we will not get the improvement to the service in a sustainable way if we don't do that. So this is not about us going away, coming up with some a service design and saying, right, here you are, we're going to do it to you. That's not going to happen.
Okay. Are teachers adequately initially and continually trained and empowered to assist with dyslexia support?
If I could comment on initial teacher training, I think that within the context of a review of the literacy service, I think teacher professional learning will be a crucial component of what is going to be looked at, and in terms of what is happening here and elsewhere. And I think that there is definitely a scope for us here in Northern Ireland to look at how dyslexia appears on the curriculum for teacher education, for teachers enter the school system. And then I think that needs to link and map onto then the programme of continuing professional development that teachers have access to when they're post qualification and they're in schools. And I think without doubt it needs to be as broad ranging as possible across the teacher education community, because every teacher, no matter what capacity of the education system that they're working at, what age group of children that they're working with, they are going to be working with dyslexic children.
Okay, who is responsible for putting a plan in place to ensure that teachers are adequately initially and continually trained and empowered to assist with dyslexia support?
Do you want to hand this one to you in terms of teachers?
Yeah, I mean, in answer to your previous question there, Chris, I think there are in true teacher fashion and report, there are very good features, but there's definite room for improvement. And who is responsible? I think that it's a joint responsibility between ourselves and our colleagues in the School Development Service, who will look at the wider literacy framework and where this fits into school improvement and school improvement strategies within school. Ourselves and you'll see that in our CYPS training calendar that we have up in terms of targeting specific needs. It's the responsibility of our school leaders to look at the professional development within their own school. It's the responsibility of the universities and the training colleges. So it's back to it's very much a landscape that we all need to work together in. But we take responsibility that we need to provide a framework for training for dyslexia.
Okay. Although a teacher teaching a class of 37 pupils probably needs to be a miracle worker, never mind trained in dyslexia support. You at this final questions, you referenced positive work in terms of specialist qualifications gained via the DE CPD literacy difficulties programme that leads to approved teacher status and associate membership of the British Dyslexia Association. Are there enough literacy service specialist peripatetic teachers?
Or I suppose in the longer term, the ultimate review, when we get into the review and we get into pupil support service design, it's at that stage really we'll know what we're going to end up in terms of needing across the schools estate in terms of specialist qualified teachers out in schools or working peripatetically.
I mean, if I've understood the connection here correctly, Kate made specific reference to the effectiveness of peripatetic support that Aidan received in removing barriers to education for him as a dyslexic pupil. So if literacy service specialist peripatetic teachers are vital, are a vital tool in dyslexia support, do we have enough of them?
I suppose, Chris, I don't think we could say no, we don't. However, what we do need to be clear about moving forward is what works for children, and making sure that we understand what the evidence is and what is the input and the support that's provided for each child in order to help them.
If you heard the evidence, am I connecting the two things same here? When Kate is referring to peripatetic support for Aidan, is it a fair assumption to make that may have referred to literacy service specialist peripatetic support? And if that is, there's one testimony that was vital. Is it if there aren't enough of those, is this not the time for you to say there aren't enough of them and to try and get resources for there to be more?
No, I think we're saying at this stage we don't have enough of them, because if we had enough of them, we wouldn't have a waiting list. So the current model, we don't have enough of them. But what I am saying is we need to understand what worked for Kate's son worked for Kate's son. And that's very important. But what worked for him does not necessarily work for other children. So we need to be very careful with assumptions, and we need to make sure that when we're looking at what the evidence of what actually works, how can we make sure that children are supported in a way that works for all children? And it will be at different tiers of intervention.
Okay. Two really quick final questions that hopefully speak to that. So what is the average waiting time for a child to access literacy service specialist peripatetic teacher support?
Well, at the current point in time, as we speak, I think when I was responding to Diane's question, I indicated we currently have 192 children waiting, and they're waiting along the line of referral from April to now. And so half of those have been and I think I explained to Diane that in terms of direct intervention, that will commence for those children together in an uplift of pupils in February.
So almost a year.
But not for the majority of them. So for instance, 100 of them were referred in since the 1st of September. So that cohort of children will have been waiting from September to January and picked up in February.
Okay. Why is literacy support service not available to children with no statement of special educational needs?
Well, the challenge has been, and I think when Liam was talking, he probably maybe hit the nail on the head, because he said that when we get to SENDIST and we get to tribunal, that the tribunal has no regard for resourcing, but the Education Authority and the Literacy Service has to have due regard to the provisional criteria, because that's what we have available to us at the moment, imperfect as it is, in terms of trying to achieve as fair and equitable of distribution of resources as we can. So we strive to apply the provisional criteria to distribute resources equitably.
Okay, so always try to look for hope, but it'd be remiss of us not to conclude then that the pupil support service is under-resourced and working off outdated and rigid criteria.
I think the service needs a review, Chris.
Okay. We'll obviously look forward to interacting with you in relation to that review, and maybe get some more details about the terms of reference of the review. But I mean, whilst the current provision proceeds, waiting for the outcome of that review, this is a concerning picture for children who need access to pupil support.
Yeah, but I think, Chris, as I said at the outset, we share this concern, and we know that we absolutely are reliant on this work over the next 18 months to deal with what has been a growing and long-term issue. Okay.
Folks, appreciate the time that you've given us today, and I know you're determined to make progress in relation to this, but it's clear there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done here to get children the support that they need. So we wish you well in that regard, and look forward to meeting with you again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Okay, if I could ask Assembly Broadcasting to bring members back into the spotlight and ask the clerk to summarise any actions or requests for additional information, and then happy to bring members in on that as well, obviously. Clerk, thank you.
Yeah, there was a lot in that, and members covered it very thoroughly. The first thing I would suggest is that we ask the EA for the details of their project now to develop a data development strategy, so that dyslexia information can be disaggregated from the general SEND statistics. And the time allocation model that was referred to as well. I think we need to have a look at that just to see, the flow of work through that system. As Diane said, it is startling that EA doesn't know how much unmet need there is. And the questions that you asked about capacity reveal a lot of strain and a lot of pressure on those provisional criteria, which it seems to be unworkable at this stage. So again, the terms of reference of the review of those criteria is something I think the committee would like to look at as a priority. And the general reform programme that is going on in EA for special educational needs, it's time to hear about it again. Our last update was before the summer, and we actually haven't had detail on the underpinning budget and resourcing of that either, so I think we need an update. Well, I have, Chair.
Chair.
Sorry, I was muted just before bringing it really quick there, Robin. I'm consistently trying to make sure that we're looking for what contribution we can make, what constructive suggestions can be made. However, I do think there is a need to take stock of just how serious the problems are in relation to pupil support in this regard. I mean, it's genuinely concerning, and I know some of the individuals and the level of the commitment that some of those EA staff have to addressing this problem, but we are scrutinising about it. The question how we've gotten to here is just hanging in the air to a certain extent. Anyway, sorry, Robin, you wanted to come in, and then maybe jump in.
Chair, could I apologise first of all? I should have been at a meeting 10 minutes ago, but such is the importance of this issue. I didn't want to leave until we had reached the conclusion. I think there were a few points, I think you were touching on some of them there, Chair. I do think we do need to know exactly what the level in terms of numbers and in quantity in terms of staff who are on the peripatetic role. And if we could quantify and have a ratio as to how many peripatetic teachers and the number of pupils that are being served. I think I was encouraged by Joe's remarks when he said that the potential to look at whether or not the dyslexia and learning difficulties should be included within the university training course of a teacher, and I think that's encouraging. But in the meantime, Chair, CPD was referred to on a number of occasions, but the word training was used. Training can mean a number of things, but I just wonder if the teachers are undertaking with their CPD accredited training, which is adding to their qualifications, rather than attending a training course for a few hours. I think it'd be important for us to know that we are building up the professional knowledge within the training, within our teachers, and really just to sort of ensure that this is a matter which obviously is of growing need within our school communities, and indeed that ratio and the number and the CPD professional qualification accredited would be used. And if we are responding in some way, Chair, that we would encourage the universities to look at the inclusion of this area within the teacher training courses, programs. I do apologise for having to leave, Chair.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other members want to come in? Yeah, Nicola Brogan. Go ahead, Nicola.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to quickly mention the Irish language or Irish medium education sector again. Even if we can maybe add this to the actions, just to ask for like a follow-up with the Education Authority to what exactly they're doing to support resources within Irish to help children with dyslexia in that sector as well. I know Joe has said they are working with Corner and Gaelscoileachta, but just to actually say exactly what they're doing, because it's unfair that they are being kind of left behind again and kind of the last ones thought of. So I would appreciate if we could include that in the actions, please.
Okay, Nicola, thanks. Any other members?
Final one, Chair, if you don't mind. Sorry, you can't see me again.
Sorry, Robbie, keep missing that hand. Apologies. Go ahead.
It's just in regard to the educational psychologist then, and that I think there's storing up a whole lot of real serious issues for ourselves in the future if it's not addressed properly. So I would think that it's something that we should be looking at their recruitment strategy for this next 10 years or whatever it is, because there's a lot of training goes in. I think it's a 3-year course possibly on additional to the psychology piece. I think it may not be the work with different, but certainly something that doesn't just copy magic out of thin air. So the longitudinal pieces I'd be really interested in. Chair, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. I asked, in what way was this service under capacity, and the answer was people. Whether that's educational psychologists, my understanding there's an issue with educational welfare officers as well. It seems like we would benefit from additional peripatetic teachers too. So yeah, it might be, that would be interested to hear about the workforce strategy. Any other members want to come in? I realise we're over time again, and I was hopeful not to do so. Justin?
Sure, yeah, just very quickly. I think it was a very, very important evidence session. Both evidence sessions were very important and disturbing, really. We heard the story from Kate in relation to Aidan and how she fought so valiantly for so many years to get the support that he needs and deserves. But I'm really worried about those parents who don't have that wherewithal and don't have that facility to fight the system, which she's had to do. And the kids who are left behind, and they have to find the data in relation to the prison population, where it's estimated that 30% of our prison population are people with dyslexia. And the life blockages that's being provided to those people because of the education system failing them, and that's what's happening here. The education system is failing people, and that needs to be addressed, and that's where our energies must be focused.
Yep. I mean, the committee has focused on SEN for quite some time, and we know it is a significant scale of a problem. But as you say, the more evidence we take, the more exposed it becomes. You'd mentioned a committee motion earlier. In terms of key action or key call emanating from this, I think it could be something along the lines of the Education Committee, expressing grave concern in relation with regards to the under-resourced and outdated nature of EA Pupil Support Service, and call on the Education Minister to bring forward a resourced action plan to provide SEN children with the support they need to succeed. But we could work on a draft in that in the background. And look, when resource comes into it, as Diane said earlier, resources can be of significance beyond just the education department as well. But I think we are, via committee sessions and evidence sessions here, exposing the extent of some of this. I think when you have a body accepting clearly that need is not being met and that review is needed, it shows you the scale of the problem. But I get impressed that the evidence we'd received was that review needed to be independent and rapid, and I'm not too sure how accurate that's going to be. So Justin, if you're content, I can maybe work with the clerk to put forward some draft language for the committee to consider, and then we could take that from there if members are content. Diane, go ahead.
No, I mean, I'm not against that. I would really like to see what it entailed, and so on, because I do think one of the things that I take your point that you did say to the chair, which was you're constantly searching for the positive in all of this, and I think there is some threat that MLAs will be seen as constantly playing politics with education. I think the general point around funding for education is probably something that's really, really important. and important to get into a committee motion probably as quickly as we can. And I accept that that's a slightly different point, and I would like to talk to you offline about it, but I think it is actually important. But before I'd agree to a committee motion, I'd like to see the language of it.
Of course, yeah, of course, absolutely. And obviously the October monitoring round briefing will come soon, and we'll want to consider resourcing for these key areas inside that. But okay, members content with the attention that we've given that today, then we'll agree those actions. Clark, happy enough?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Clark, that moves us to agenda item 9, which is the consideration of responses to the committee's call for evidence on the committee stage of the Integrated Education Bill. I note I perhaps accidentally discharged this item in the form of our programme item earlier. Is that more or less the case, Clark, or are there any other aspects of that I ought to be referring to now?
No, you did rehearse it quite thoroughly. So if members see someone on that list who's not in the programme, or if there actually have been a couple of replies from school pupils. I don't know if members want to have some school pupils up to say what they think about integrated education. If so, let me know. But yes, the chair did cover that earlier.
Yeah, and just thanks and apologies. But okay. Just to recap, the briefing paper from the clerk is in the table papers, as is a list of written responses. Summary of responses through the Citizen Space portal that I referred earlier is in table pack as well, and correspondence from integrated alumni. Clark, I think the idea of hearing directly from children and young people is a good idea and consistent with the approach the committee has been taking, so perhaps we can factor that into things. Okay, members, conscious of time, agenda item 10 is any other business? No? Okay, then the date and time of our next formal meeting is a joint meeting with the Committee for the Economy on the 14 to 19 strategy, and is scheduled for Wednesday the 20th of October in the Senate chamber in Starleaf at 10 a.m, Clark, is that right?
10 to 11:30, yeah.
Okay, so if members can get that in their diary. Is there an informal meeting next Tuesday to alert members to, Clark?
There is, I'm pretty sure. Oh no, okay. Sorry, it's actually, they're not sure that they can come on the 19th. It was
okay. Well, if there is, if you could get early notice out to members, because I know that can be a tough diary slot given assembly business. Okay, then members. On that note, then I put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.